We're going to bring the regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee to order. We have a quorum, Mr. Englander, also Mr. Koretz, myself, Bernard Parks is the chair. The other two members are unavailable today. What we'd like to do, colleagues, if we can go through the agenda and look at item 10 for consent. And if we can agree on that one.
That's the only one I had a question on.
You had a question? Huh?
I had a question on. That's fine.
Oh, you want to hold it?
Yeah, hold on.
Okay, we'll hold item 10. Let's see if we can go on consent on items 11, 14, 16, 17, 18, and 19, which are all liens.
I have a question on 19.
Okay, we can hold 19.
I'm okay with all the others.
Okay. The also, we'd like to receive and file 12, 13, and 15, which are liens that have been resolved. And let me just ask, if we have someone that represents Office of Finance, I'd like to ask the question
We can
on
eliminate
those three.
if there's a question on just the claim class part.
The only question I have is on 12, 13, and 15, we've been told they've been resolved. Should we assume that with that term resolved and we receive and file that the amount of money that's listed on the report has been obtained, or is there lesser money, or what should we assume has been the outcome?
On one of the cases, we've entered into an installment agreement.
Okay, could you give us a number, like on which one, 12? Which one?
That'll be number 15.
Number 15. We entered in what now?
Pardon, I'm sorry.
You said you entered into what?
An installment agreement.
Installment, for the
tax
same
payment.
amount?
I would have to get the exact amount for you later.
Because it shows here 48,000. Is that the installment for that total amount?
I would need to get that amount for you later.
All right, if you could have that for us when it comes to council. What about number 13?
The entity in question is in bankruptcy.
Does that mean there is no money forthcoming?
It's possible. It depends on the filing in the bankruptcy court.
So we have standing in the bankruptcy?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and then number 12.
That would be the same situation in bankruptcy.
Bankruptcy. Okay. So colleagues, if we can move 12, 13, and 14 and receive and file with those explanations, along with 11,
12, 13, and 15.
12, 13, and 15. And then also we move on consent 11, 14, 16, 17, 18. Okay? Do we agree on that? Yes. Okay. So we'll move those items, and again, with that, the instructions that or the information we received about 12, 13, and 14. First of all, we'd like to start off the agenda. We have a commissioner. Thank you very much. For the Bernardino. Come on. Let me ask, is there somebody here from the mayor's office on this appointment? Just wanted to check from the mayor's office. We've not received the ethics report. Is there some idea when that will be forthcoming?
It should be. I can check immediately and get back to your office, sir.
I understand this is coming to council tomorrow, so would we get that prior to that meeting? Is there a timeline on this appointment?
But the seat's vacant now, so we'd like to get him.
I don't understand, but we're not running against the deadline.
Yeah, Aaron.
Yes, the last day for council to act is this Wednesday.
We are ready. So we make sure we get that tomorrow, so
Yes.
we can at least, I understand it's being worked on, we just haven't seen it.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Bernardino. How's everything?
Good afternoon, Chief. It's good to see you.
Good I see. Could you
afternoon,
give us a
Matt.
little overview of what your background is as it relates to this position on the fire police pension and what some of your immediate goals will be?
Yes, sir. Except for when I lived in Washington, when I worked for the Department of Justice, I've lived and worked,
Speak right into that, Mike.
sorry. Except for a brief time when I lived in Washington, D.C., when I worked for the Department of Justice, I've lived and worked in the city of Los Angeles my entire life, having gone to USC for college and later law school, clerked for a federal judge, and am now in private practice. I was recently on, and I still am on, the Proposition Q Citizen Oversight Committee, and I think that has been a great experience for me. And one of the things that I've tried to do in that regard is something I'll try to continue to do on this important board, which is meet with rank and file as well as other interested stakeholders to get their input on matters. In regards to my duties, I think my duties are very clear, and I plan to follow them all out, in that make sure that the members and their beneficiaries receive their services promptly, try to minimize the input from the city in terms of finances, and also try to control costs, administrative costs. I think those are set out by statute, and those are very good goals to follow, I think.
Okay. Let me just ask, what type of law practice do you have?
I'm a trial lawyer, and I mostly have represented businesses, almost exclusively in my career, large entities, but those have also included large charitable institutions such as the Presbyterian Church and others, but represented mostly large businesses in complex financial disputes.
Okay, so you're primarily civil.
Yes, sir, but I have had criminal experience, both when I was with the Department of Justice and also in private practice. Again, those would be in sorts of financial crimes, federal crimes, sir.
Do you see any from your client list that there's a potential of any conflict of interest
No.
as it relates to these duties?
No, sir. Very carefully, the Ethics Commission provided me with the various lists of persons that the board contracts with and the board works through in terms of investments, and I reviewed it very carefully. And I had each of my partners review it very carefully, and our firm conflicts check review it very carefully, and we received nothing on that. And we'll be very careful to make sure that we don't have any conflicts.
Okay. And then also your current assignment on Prop Q oversight, does that continue, or do you?
Yes, sir. I'm still on it, and I would like it to continue because of some work that we're doing that I started. I'd like to see it through to the end, and it involves the building of a new police station out in Northeast, and I'd like to help see that through, and then I think I will have accomplished something there and feel free to move on entirely.
Okay. My final question is just if you give us a little thumbnail on what your background or what you perceive will be your approach in dealing with the management of these pension funds and the investment strategies.
Well, the first thing I think I would want to do is, in terms of the investment strategy, is review the performance. Because although I've been provided with a list of everyone and I have a list of the allocations, I don't really know who has been performing well, who has not been performing well. And I would intend to look at that very carefully. I know that in the past they have made decisions to stop doing business with persons who are not performing well, and I would hope that I would continue to do that. I would also try to find some economies of scale in terms of the work that's performed. I know that there are 3 pension boards, and I would try to see if there's any way we can get economies in terms of the cost that we have to pay for our investments, and quite frankly, see how the other boards are doing. If they have a good strategy, if they are being successful, I would try to use as much of that as possible and share as much information as possible with them to, again, achieve economies of scale for the city and the best benefit or the greatest investment return for the board. In terms of costs, I would look very carefully at some of the administrative costs to make sure that the benefits, we get the most bang for our buck, sir. You know, I'm very new to this, and so I think that I'll have a good eye towards looking at duplicative costs. And I think I may have seen some just by evaluating this.
Very good. Mitch?
I just had a quick question, Mr. Bernardino. Thank you, first of all, for coming before the body, and as well your past experience in volunteering as a commissioner in Prop Q and others.
Thank you for inviting me, Councilman.
My only question, your resume is incredibly impressive, and you listed all of your community affiliations, which is lengthy as well. The only thing I didn't see here, that I wanted to ask about, was your experience or education in dealing with pensions and what you've done in the past in understanding pensions, and particularly with what's going on now with pensions and all the problems. What would you bring the light on that?
Well, I think two things, sir. One professionally, one personally. I know you have a big agenda, so I'll try to be brief. Professionally, although I have not represented pension funds, I've represented large institutions and large securities cases, both as plaintiffs and defendants. And so I think that I'm good at asking questions, and I'm good at looking at situations. And having represented a number of defendants, including criminal defendants, I think I have a good eye for what doesn't make sense, what doesn't look good, and for asking hard questions and not accepting gloss as a response. I think for my practice there at a high level, I think it's helpful. In regards to the pensions, I would offer a personal level. And I don't wear this watch very often, but I wear it today. It's my dad's 50 years in the union watch. He was operating engineers. And I would not be here before this board. I would not have these opportunities had my dad not been in a union. And when my dad got cancer, we needed those benefits very much. And so I bring, I think, a personal level as well, a dedication that I don't just have a theoretical understanding that these men and women deserve this and need this support, but I know what it means when you have a family member sick and need that support. So I think I can be hard where I have to be, and I think I can be compassionate or try to find the best approach always, because I'm not, Councilman, most of my work, I deal with one large company against another large company. It'll affect somebody's balance sheet, it'll affect someone's stock price, but it won't affect any individuals, really. This will affect individuals, so I will hopefully bring that sort of care and concern to serve the members and their beneficiaries and the retireds as well.
Well,
No, I don't have any questions. You have a great background, and I expect you'll do a great job in this position.
Thank you, Councilman, for your
Thank you for your
kindness.
willingness to do it.
And thank you for having me here today.
Mike, are you going to endorse him?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Looking forward to working with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll see you in council tomorrow.
Thank you, Chief Parker.
Thank you. Let me just clean up one thing. I didn't realize that a card on number 14 is Kia Kuri still here. Why don't you come on up? We'll reconsider 14 for your comments.
If you want to move, I got my answer. I got my question answer on it, and if you want to go back to the
Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity. Our case is really simple. We missed the opportunity to respond to the auditor, and because we were in the middle of a move, and all we're requesting is that Department of Finance rehear our responses to the audit. And in all our conversations with the department, they've all agreed that we do have a case. It's just because of the procedures, we just need to have this be referred back to the auditor.
Let me ask if they're represented from Office of Finance. Let me just ask for you two to get together.
We did before this
and
meeting.
that you come to some resolution as this moves to council, and hopefully by the time it gets to council, we can receive and file it or have some resolution, okay? Because if we had to get into the details of your case, we'd have to go in closed session.
And this is definitely not the place.
Okay, so we would like the two of you to get together and resolve it.
Thank you.
Okay, so we move item 14 again on consent. And Mr. Englander, you have your answers on number 10?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so
Thank
we
you
will
very much.
move item 10 also on consent.
I didn't see it.
Okay. Let me just, I noticed on the cards that most people are here for item 4. What I'd like to make sure you're aware, there are copies of a document that the CLA produced this morning. It is about 11 recommendations as relates to the ordinance that's been proposed. If you have an opportunity, there's copies here in the room. It might resolve some of your concerns either for or against. To give you an opportunity to review those reports that are here, we're going to have item number 4 last on the agenda because of the number of people plus the recent information. The other thing is, when this item was before the committee a while back, we had asked the CLA to work with the city attorney on ensuring that the ordinance complied with the direction of this committee, and this report is in response to that. And so what I would hope today is to go through the cards that are here with the expectation, because this report just came out today, that we would ask the CLA and the city attorney to continue working, and that we would bring it back to committee on October the 3rd to hopefully resolve these 11 recommendations that the CLA has proposed. So that's what our game plan is, but we'd like for you to have an opportunity to see the report just as we saw it early this morning. Okay? Let me start off with item 2 and 3 together.
2, sure. Both of those together. Item 2 is a city controller report relative to a summary briefing of the reserve fund status for fiscal year end 2010-11 and fiscal year start 2011-12. Item 3 is the city controller report relative to the preliminary financial status report of financial operations for the city of Los Angeles for fiscal year 2010-11.
Good afternoon, committee members. Matthias Farfan for the Office of the Controller. Before I begin, on behalf of the Controller and her staff, we extend our appreciation to all city departments and offices for their help and cooperation in the year-end closing during these exceedingly difficult times, and on top of implementing a new financial system on July 1. The preparation of the required annual state and federal reporting cannot commence until the completion of the year-end closing. So now that that's completed, we can move forward with those reports. I'm here today to discuss the September 1 and September 20th correspondences regarding the cash position of the city at the 2010-11 year-end and 2011-12 year start, as well as several issues that the Controller believes are worth noting. Regarding the reserve fund and the cash position of the city, the 2011-12 adopted budget anticipated a July 1 reserve fund cash balance of $177.2 million, which equates to approximately 4.0% of the planned general receipts. The actual July 1 reserve fund cash balance was $200.7 million, approximately 4.58% of planned general receipts. Although this was $23.5 million more than was anticipated in the budget, it was less than the 5% of the general fund receipts prescribed by the reserve fund policy. If we would have hit the 5%, it would have been $219.3 million, which takes us to some issues that the Controller has identified that merit monitoring as we move forward. These include, for one, the current year revenues because of the recent economic turmoil. We'll just have to keep an eye on those. And as we monitor the city's cash flow throughout the year, if we see any negative deviances from the plan, we'll come forward and report those to you. Number 2, the amended budget approved by council on July 19th also merits monitoring because it relies on substitute savings instead of work furloughs, so we'll have to keep a close eye on those. We have noticed that salary expenditures are higher than those that were in our original cash plan, or cash flow plan because of that, but there will be some offsetting savings that were in that amended budget. Number 3, that merits monitoring is the ongoing litigation regarding the city's telephone tax. Number 4 is likely new rules from the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, that's GASB, that will change how pension liabilities are reflected in our annual financial statements. Once these rules we've received an exposure draft, we anticipate that these rules will probably go in effect as early as the current year financial data that we'll be reporting on next fiscal year. And then number 5 is beginning trend disparities that we're seeing between the financial information in the city's budget and the comprehensive annual financial report that we put out annually. Our budget is cash basis, so we keep a close eye on how much cash we have on hand at any point in time, whereas the comprehensive annual financial report, that we prepare under generally accepted accounting principles, which requires us to accrue expenditures and revenues, which then has the data reflected differently. The report also includes a list of 6 recommendations for approval regarding the reserve fund. They're listed on page Romanet 10 of the report. That said, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on either one of those correspondences.
And the recommendations are attached to number 3?
Yes, they're on, it's Romanet 10. So in the report, you'll notice the cover letter, and then right after the cover letter, there's a report that starts with Romanet 1, and that's, I guess, lowercase Roman numerals. And on Romanet 10, there's 6 recommendations listed there.
Okay, I must be missing that. I did not see that. Is that in the table of contents?
That's not in the table of contents. The table of contents lists the page numbers for the financial schedules that are attached to the report.
Okay.
Would you like him to go over those recommendations?
Yes, why don't you go through them, because I did not see them.
Do you want to go through? Well, recommendation 1 is that the mayor and council exercise extreme caution when making decisions involving the use of the reserve fund throughout the year. Number 2 is that the mayor and council review the $25.7 million in reappropriations to determine if all are necessary. Those are listed in the report. Recommendation number 3 is to instruct departments listed in Table 3 to report to the CAO and the controller on plans to accelerate repayment of reserve fund advances for unfunded expenditures. Recommendation 4 is to instruct invoicing and paying departments involved in unfunded expenditures, listed on Table 3 as well, to review their procedures to identify methods to improve their invoicing and paying processes. Number 5 is to instruct departments listed in Table 3A to report to the council on the need to expend over the amount budgeted or the amount of cash available in special revenue funds. And number 6 is to instruct departments to report to mayor and council on all prior year encumbrances with a valid business reason for each encumbered item in order to disencumber unwarranted items and increase reversions to the reserve fund.
Thank you. Let me just go through a couple of questions and see, clarify a couple of things. Have we got any better revenue estimates as of the 26th of this month when this report was written on September the 1st?
We do not. A bulk of our revenues start coming in after November, and that's when we'll start getting a better sense of how we are.
We were in a meeting recently, and I thought we were advised that the second, third week of September, we'd get a feel of some of our revenue numbers.
No, usually we'll get a bulk of our property tax, sales tax, those business tax usually comes in after, February. So that's the large amounts. Right now, the only thing we're tracking is things like hotel tax, which we receive monthly, and not much. It's more carry forward property taxes from last year, maybe some documentary transfer tax, but they're really not good indicators of how we're doing.
Okay. Mr. CEO, because I think we talked about this at the EERC as to the latter part of September, we thought we'd get some numbers.
So we are tracking those numbers. We are going to be releasing our first financial status report later this week, and hopefully we'll have this in committee next week. It is early in the year. Many of the large revenue sources have not come in yet. But with the first couple months of data, we have seen some numbers come in, some a little bit higher than budget plan, some a little bit lower. But overall, we're right where we expected to be as far as the budget plan overall.
Okay. Let me ask, on the FSR that comes out next week, is that going to address or at least look at what's proposed or what is currently stated as a $196 million deficit in this budget. Are we going to begin a plan to look at that in our first FSR?
In the first FSR, we're going to be looking at identifying, well, first of all, reporting revenues to give everyone an update on that, reporting expenditure numbers through the first couple months of the year to give us a sense where departments are. We will look at options as far as addressing the current year issues, but certainly we're going to stress that we need to start taking some action in dealing with the following year's deficit. That's I know it's been presented earlier at $196 million, as you mentioned, but I think we need to expect that it's going to be well over 200 for 12-13.
Okay. What I'm concerned about is, and we've had some success as putting a plan together, we generally follow most of it, not all of it, but is whether if we get into by the second FSR, we're 6 months into the year, which makes it even more difficult. I'm just wondering whether we'd have some plan to address that between FSR 1 and 2.
We are going to ask or include some recommendations in this report to actually address any of our current year problems or liabilities. But we are going to suggest that certainly by the second FSR, we want to lay out a game plan as far as how we start addressing 12-13. I think as mentioned, in the outlook, we have this $200+ million. But as been mentioned, there are some other potential liabilities that certainly can increase that number, given what decisions may actually occur.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask back to the controller. Could you give us a little better understanding of looking at the accounting rules, just what that means as it relates to our pension? Is it that we will be owing more in the pension? Is it that we're reporting it differently? Is it a greater liability? Just what is that?
We would be reporting it differently. Right now, the actual liability, the outstanding liability from the pension system, the net liability is not reflected in our financial statements. The rule states that it would now have to come onto the financial statements. But aside from that, the way it would be calculated would be different than the way we perform our calculation to fund the system. So that there is a movement to separate out our funding methodology from our financial reporting methodology. And it all comes down to, at the end of the day, if there is a pension liability that's outstanding, how to derive how much of that belongs to that particular fiscal year and reflecting it in the financial statements.
So that could affect at some point what our rating and also our bond indebtedness if we're showing more debt in a given fiscal year?
It would, and you have to remember the GASB rules for the most part, they establish a standardized way of reporting, so external users of the CAFR could compare how we measure up to other entities. So if at the end of the day we're reflected as being worse off than someone else, then yes, it would impact us. There is, in that methodology that they've outlined in the exposure draft, there is, for the most part, that there's the DWP pension system and the fire and police pension system use a portion of their funding methodology. How they calculate it is consistent with the way it would have to be done for the financial reporting. So as far as they're concerned, it would just require two actuarial studies, one for the funding and one for how it's reflected in the financial statements. Lacers, they do have a difference from the other two pension systems. So for them, it would be a little bit more complicated as far as when we go ahead and reflect it in the financial statements. There would need to be an extensive write-up that would explain how those numbers, why there is a difference between the way we do our funding and the way it's reported in financial reporting. And if at some point Lacers does change their methodology to be more consistent with the way the other two pension systems do their calculation for their funding purposes, there would be an impact on how much we are funding towards the system. Without having the studies out, we can't say what those impacts would be.
It's one thing, and I think when you say the reporting could change, But when you talk about the methodology or the calculated liability, that then appears that that's a little more serious than just reporting.
Yes, it is. And like I said, it's in the exposure draft, what it's stated is that in doing the calculation, it would require that for the financial statements that the systems use what's called the entry age normal actuarial cost method. That would be mandatory. And like I mentioned, DWP and fire and police pensions currently do use that method. But lacers right now, they use what's called the projected unit credit cost method. And that's where if lacers did change their methodology to that entry age normal actuarial cost method, then that would impact pretty much, it could be a significant impact when it's applied to the other post-employment benefits portion of that funding calculation. So that is the potential. They could remain with their current method, but if they do, that would require additional work on the actuary, and so it would just be an increased cost to the city. It would also require more work on our part when we do the write-up in the management discussion analysis portion of the CAFR to explain the bridge between the way we're funding the system and the way we're reflected in the financial statements.
Okay. Then explain to us a little bit more on the issue of this, I think it's the first time I've seen it, where there was a concern about banking of overtime.
Yes, most of right now, the city has gone down the path where we've negotiated contracts that increase the banking of time with the intention that employees will take that time off at some point and will prevent cash payouts. What happens at the end of the year when we close out the books and we start preparing the data for the CAFR, there's a section in the CAFR that does report on long-term liabilities. So we do get reporting from the payroll systems at year end. If there is any bank time on the books on June 30th, we go ahead and calculate what that dollar liability is, and that does appear in our CAFR as a long-term liability. It's much like reporting on long-term debt, outstanding debt. So if departments are banking overtime, and for some reason people don't take the time off by year end, and on June 30th, when we take the snapshot, if those banks keep on growing, then that's the time when we calculate the cost of that time, that's what appears in the CAFR.
And we've not reported that in the past?
We do report it every year.
Okay.
It's reported, there has been an increase in it, as we moved on from year to year. But with the new labor deals that now encourage that we bank the time and then have employees take the time off, it just could accelerate that growth in the bank time.
Okay. And then also, on that same category, do we also show as future liability when we're in a 2 or 3 year contract on MOU that's showing future liability for benefits or pay increases?
We do, not the pay increases. We do include, for instance, if we defer payments, that's something else we have to look out for. If, for instance, the city were to adopt a particular year to defer a large payment that pretty much that expenditure was accrued this year, yet we deferred it for next fiscal year. When we went ahead and prepared the CAFR, we would still reflect that expenditure as a current year expenditure. And that was the example that was provided in the report for the early retirement incentive program, where we deferred the payout for the overtime and some cash payouts for the people that participated in ERIP. Those still were posted in the financial statements as current year liabilities. They weren't, pretty much you don't defer them in the financial statements. If we've already incurred the expenditure and the expenditure is due within a year, it's already posted in the financial statements as having hit in the financial statements.
Okay.
My question on that, though, and thanks for asking. I was going to ask those questions, but on the banked overtime, though those are contractually negotiated, how can we ask departments that are manage them when they have the opportunity to bank them? You mean better managed to report them so we can, I'm not quite sure.
Exactly. It would just be something to make sure that departments are monitoring how much time they have banked.
But they can't control them.
They could, in the agreements, there is language that indicates if an employee exceeds a certain hourly banked amount, that management, would work with that employee to schedule the time off. There are triggers worded in there, but I'd leave it, to someone from employer relations to explain that, the technical parts of that. But we can definitely track how much that bank time there is on the books at any given point in time. And if we do notice that some departments have a trend where it keeps on increasing, and we're already, let's say in March, and there's no sign that they're trying to bring down those banked hours, that some sort of, that management start working with their employees to make sure they bring down those banked hours before we hit that June 30th mark. And it's just keeping tabs on them to make sure that they're always monitoring those banked hours, because even though at the end of the year, that's what we're trying to get at, is that they might achieve savings in their salaries accounts, which would increase our reversions to the reserve fund, so we would have the cash on hand. But then when we prepare the financial information for the CAFR, there we would now reflect the long-term liabilities increasing.
Just for clarity, is your reason for monitoring to make sure they stay under what their proposed cap is? If they have a cap of 200 hours or 60 hours, is that what you're basically getting at, is we know they're banking it, but you're monitoring to see if they stay under the agreed cap?
Yes, and it would be more of just making sure that they conform with the policy that's been approved by council, as far as the intent of the agreement upon items where that, the bank time would be increased, and that it would just be for management flexibility. So then at some point during the fiscal year, when workload decreases, employees would take that time off, and it's just making sure that they are taking that time off and that it doesn't continue to be banked.
Two questions. One I think is probably a mistake in the report, but I just wanted to clarify it.
Yes.
There's a paragraph that says that, well, we only anticipated $177 million and change for our reserve fund. It's higher than that, but expresses some concern that it's still below the $219 million prescribed by the city's reserve fund policy. But then the same paragraph, it says that it's actually $220 million. So that would appear to be above the reserve policy, which is somewhat remarkable in this economy. So
that's a typo. It's a typo. It should be 200.7 instead of 220.
Okay, so it is only 200.7. Okay.
Yes.
That was the clarification. On a real issue, we had a Supreme Court ruling that would potentially increase our liability claims dramatically. Can you talk about that in public in terms of the impact, or should we schedule a time to do that in closed session?
I think if you want to hear the accident update on the status of the liability, then we'd have to do it in closed session period. But I think as just in general, through our disclosure to our investors and so forth, we do report a potential, and I say again, potential liability of up to $750 million.
Okay, and I guess at some future time in closed session, perhaps we could discuss the likelihood of that and what we really anticipate, because that's a significant chunk of our...
I believe about a month ago, council did, we did get an update. I think there was some direction to the city attorney. They will be reporting back periodically throughout the year.
Okay.
We do, it's hard to say actually when we may get either a settlement or a judgment, but it's something that we need to prepare and plan for.
Okay, I presume we have to do that some way for the budget, because that's an enormous chunk of money. It could obviously have a huge impact on the city. Thank you.
Let me my final question is one of your recommendations at some point our financial reporting and your CFAR What is it?
CAFR?
Cap,
Yes.
it is going to be consistent? Is that what the ultimate goal?
Well, yes, it's more, again, that our budget is cash basis, and in the past, we have made sure that, that we keep our long-term liabilities and our liabilities in check, so the CAFR information has been consistent with our budget information. They've gone in hand, but as we've come up with budget solutions and understanding that they're needed for transitioning to, a different way of doing business, so there will be some discrepancies. We just need to make sure that if they are consistent, it's a sign that we are managing the city, consistently, that we're not, implementing too many one-time fixes or deferring payments, because if we do that too often, then that's when you will start seeing discrepancies where you would see a healthy reserve fund cash balance, but then when we come out with the CAFR report, the financial statements there may show a different story.
And also, do we have an expectation on those draft reports that eventually they may become mandates to deal with pensions? On the reporting? You
On
said
the
it was
reporting, yes, that would be the GASB reporting. And they've already released the exposure drafts. They've stated that they may release the final draft sometime in March, between March and May of 2012. But then they're also stating that it would already be effective for the financial statements for fiscal years closing out after June 15th of 2012, which would impact the CAFR of the current fiscal year when we prepare it a year from now.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Colleagues, we can note and file items 2 and 3. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
For clarification, on item number 3, does the committee want to approve the controller's recommendations?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think you mentioned we'll take item 4 last. So if we go to item 5 and 6, probably can take those.
And also, we can take 7 and 8 together.
7 and 8?
When it gets to that.
Yes, okay. So item 5 is the city attorney report relative to outside council expenditures for fiscal year 2010-11 as of February 28th and April 30th of 2011. And item 6 is the city attorney report relative to outside council expenditures for fiscal year 2010-11 as of June 30th.
Good afternoon, council members. Assistant City Attorney Ann Haley and Gemma Boyzersee of our office, keeper of the outside counsel. We're happy to answer whatever questions you might have.
Let me just start off with number 1, with outside counsel. Do we think we're going to be within budget for this fiscal year?
Yes, Councilman, that is our intention. We are on track to be within this year's budget.
This may be a side question, but we've gotten a couple of calls and needed to verify if the proprietaries and the pension department are paying for their city attorney resources. Are they paying the full amount but getting resources that are on furlough, or are they just paying what they're actually getting in hours?
Now, that I'm not sure, but with regard to outside counsel, certainly.
No, but I'm just saying, it's off the sub, but I just wanted to ask that question because that's something that came to us recently, that the 3 proprietaries and the pensions are all saying they are willing and have the necessity to have full-time city attorneys on board, but yet their resources are furloughed. And so it was unclear when they mentioned it whether they are paying for the full amount and they're being furloughed, or are they only paying for the furloughed amount? Does anybody?
Ida Rubio with the CAO's office. Related to the proprietary billings, the departments are paying for what the department is being billed for.
Okay. So the information we got was an error then, because they thought they were being charged for the full amount.
They are being charged for direct salaries and indirect costs.
But they're not paying for furlough days that they're not getting.
If they are taking a furlough day, then they wouldn't be billed for a furlough day.
Very good. All right, that clarified. Questions? Any questions? Oh. Okay, we'll move those two, note and file those two city attorneys' reports.
Thank you.
Now, the next report you bring us will be the new format that you and the CLA are working on?
Yes, and the CAO as well, we all
Okay.
work together,
Very
yes. And that will be a quarterly report starting this. Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, taking items 7 and 8. 7 is a CO report and addendum relative to the first construction project report for fiscal year 2011-12. And item 8 is the CO report relative to year-end reappropriations for 2010-11 capital improvement expenditure program.
Should I, item number 7? As Ray mentioned, this is the first construction report of this fiscal year. We're also including an addendum report, which hopefully you also have a copy of. The CPR is basically has two sections. The first section is a brief status report of the current CIP or Capital Improvement Expenditure Program projects and general obligation bond programs. And the other section includes the recommendations consisting of the funding adjustments that are related to current construction projects that are occurring in the city and that are needed in order to keep these projects on track. These financial adjustments consist primarily of reimbursements to the various cities departments from general obligation bonds and MICLA financings, for example. In both of these reports, the combined total transfers and appropriations is $5.6 million, of which $3.12 million is recommended in the addendum report. Approximately $5.2 million is recommended for appropriations to GSD to perform construction work on various projects. As indicated in the addendum report, a total of $3.12 million is recommended for GSD to begin improvements to the second floor of the Piper Tech Center, where the LAPD Scientific Investigation Division Tech Lab project is planned to be relocated. Funding will consist of $1.5 million from the Police Forfeited Asset Trust Fund and $1.62 million from Prop 2 GOB funds. I do want to point out that we want to request a correction to be made to the account number that we're using where the funds are being transferred from within the Police Forfeited Assets Trust Fund. The $1.5 million should come from Fund 44D, account 70G438, instead of account 70G535, as indicated in the addendum report. Other projects that GSD will be working on include projects for the Bureau of Sanitation, for example, modifying 4 existing workstations at the North Solid Resource Collection Yard. Also work for the CRA projects, doing asset management and construction and building maintenance work. There's also work that GSD will be doing regarding the fire life safety building systems, the Reg 4 testing. About $119,000 is being recommended for them to start doing testing on the buildings throughout the city. There's about $188,000 for Fire Station 89 for renovation work. GSD will also be doing tenant improvements for the Public Works building totaling $220,000, for example. There's also work that GSD will be doing for 6 recreation and park projects totaling $150,000. $125,000 of it is for the construction of a new Harbor Recreation Center skate park. And there's about $3,000 that GSD will be doing for barnyard improvements at the West Valley Animal Shelter. I do want to point out that the estimated impact to the general fund due to operations and maintenance costs for these transactions does total approximately at this time $41,000, and is due primarily to expansions to the recreation and park facilities. We have representatives for the projects if you have any additional questions.
If I may, we also want to read into the record another subsequent transfer. This is basically using savings from existing funds within the Venice Area Surplus Real Property Trust Fund. We would utilize existing savings and move the money into 2 new accounts to do some work in the Venice area, and I believe the members have a copy of that. Is correct.
All right. Very good. Let me just ask CEO on the $41,000 operational and maintenance. Is that already in the this year's budget, or is that money we have to find?
I think it's certainly anything that's involved this year will be okay, but it's something that we have to be aware of as we move forward, 2012, 13, and beyond.
Correct.
So it's not allocated at this time?
No.
Okay. Then let me just ask a couple of other questions on specific project. You mentioned the lab moving to
Pepper Tech?
Piper Tech. Do we have a date of when Parker Center will actually close upon that move?
We have Ramon Soto from our office who can give you more details. Thank you.
Ramon Soto, CAO's office. The Tech Lab project at Piper Tech is scheduled to be completed around September of 2012. So at that point, then those operations could move. I don't believe there are any other police department operations at Parker Center at this point. So at that point, that facility should be able to be locked up.
So what do we expect if it's finished in September, a month or two to get it moved, or?
The moving is very quick. So yes, it could be just a matter of a couple of weeks.
Okay. And so somewhere immediately after that, then we could look to close it. Okay. And then one thing I was going to ask on the Mount Lee communication, I think Mr. Labange has a motion that in addition to this upgrade of this project, it appears that the access roads are uninhabitable, and so we would do the electrical upgrade or technology upgrade, but can't get to the site. And so I know he was either going to do a motion last couple of weeks ago, or he's already done it, to ask for those to be considered.
We allow with the sales office. In this year's budget, there is general fund money for what we refer to as Site 9 or 9 for Mount Lee. That's where when you're driving up, you'll see the barricades. We did visit the site with engineering, and they're working on a cost estimate for the 14 sites that's been identified on that road. But since it's a road that is basically not accessible to public vehicles, and it includes rec and park land, we're looking at general fund money for that road to fix it.
Very good. All right, so that was. Then let me just ask the other thing on phase 2 on the animal facilities. Do we know when that's coming to council for approval?
Again, Ramon Soto, CAO's office. That's actually going to be in council tomorrow, council member. It was most recently in Public Safety Committee a couple of weeks ago, and it's now pending council consideration tomorrow.
And then my final question is, you probably have answered this one too, Jackie Tatum, when do we think that skate park will be finished?
I believe someone from GSD is here who could answer that question, hopefully. But is there anybody here from Bureau of Engineering? The skate park.
Harvard Skate Park. Harvard Skate, Jackie Tatum Harvard Skate Park.
It doesn't say, board approved. Yeah, sorry, I would have to get back to you on that one. Unfortunately, in the write-up, we don't have detail as to when it's going to be completed.
We could just get that information to Purvey in our office.
Definitely.
Okay.
We'll email it to you.
Thank you. Mitch?
No questions right now.
Oh, okay. We'll move items 7 and 8 with the recommended language from the CAO to amend the report and to
Okay, let's just take us to item 9. Item 9 is Office of Finance reports relative to the tax penalty waiver process.
let me just, on item 8, also approve the CAO's recommendation. We have,
Like they're going.
what do you have, 9?
Yes, 9.
I'm the new guy. You kidding me?
Carl Sampson, Office of Finance, and our report is in response to questions on our report that we submitted in November of last year regarding our penalty waiver process.
Okay. Let me just go through, because I think I asked the question. When we talk about the penalty, what we were trying to get to, it appeared that every time we had someone that protest a deficiency in their payment, that we'd almost always waive the penalty, no matter if they were cooperative or not. And we're looking to ensure that there was some kind of sliding scale as related to providing those who may have been cooperative, may not have understood, didn't have the criteria that you've established would be treated differently from those that just ignored, or we found out they were in a business that was unpermitted, and they were dealt with differently. And does this current system that you're recommending, does it account for those kinds of adjustments?
What we're doing based on our current guidelines, which we implemented in February, was that for any of those taxpayers that are basically filing due to lack of knowledge, they need to meet a requirement that they're a newly discovered business. They're not a business that has been in operation, that has been getting notifications. So all of those that we waive under those situations are only those that are newly discovered. And then, those would be waived at the counter locations up to $5,000, and anything above that would then be reviewed by our central penalty waiver group.
Okay. And does this kind of streamline the process from what we were doing?
Yes, it does. Again, basically, if you fall into that category and it's under $5,000 and you come to the counter, it's pretty much the counters have the authority to approve that. If it's for other reasons or dollar amounts that are greater dollar amounts, we require documentation and proof if it is something that was a result of the taxpayer losing their records or unforeseen circumstances, unless it's something that is identified as Office of Finance as being the cause of the issue. We are requiring documentation for those other instances. And then the other thing in reviewing a lot of the other cities, we also put a time limit as well, that the request for the waiver must be made within 6 months of when that viability was identified.
And that's the procedure that we adopted from Napa?
Yeah, Napa did that.
Then, so I'm clear on it, generally, if we have a dispute, the principal and interest, we generally...
That has to be paid.
Has to be paid.
Yep.
We basically can negotiate the principal unless it's some overall court settlement. We might negotiate...
Yeah, for the penalty waivers, we really evaluate that sort of all or nothing, unless it is in a settlement, which those may be negotiated amounts.
Okay. Very good. Mitch? Okay, we'll note and file that report. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right, that actually will take us to item 19. I think we had a request to take up the Office of Finance report relative to requesting approval to record a lien for unpaid taxes amount of $170,746.52 against property located at 555 North Mass Street in El Segundo, California, and owned by the Los Angeles Kings Hockey Club.
Yeah, I just had one somewhat obvious question on this. Usually, to get to the point where you have to record a lien, you'd assume there's little communication, et cetera, et cetera. How could we get to the point where we need to record a lien against a property owned by the Los Angeles Kings Hockey Club? It seems like they're pretty accessible. We interact with them. Why do we get to this point?
Yeah, Bradley Moll, Office of Finance.
And Jeffrey Whitmore from the Office of Finance.
There has been communication with the taxpayer.
But just to clarify, all of the actions that we take in initiating these liens are based on audits that have been performed. So this was the result, the findings from an audit that occurred. I don't know personally whether it was perhaps an underpayment or how this was derived over a course of years, but based upon an audit.
Well, I understand why they owe the money, but how do we not collect from the LA Kings? I mean,
well, understanding, of course,
one would think you'd call up and say, hey, you owe us the money, we found this in an audit, cut us a check.
Well, the process, of course, it's a self-reporting tax. So unless you are audited, we are taking it at your word, basically, until such time as we find that you're reporting inaccurately.
And so we found this inaccuracy. Presumably, we communicated with them. What did they say to us about why they weren't paying?
The communications occurred at various levels, but all I can tell you in this particular case is that we have been in constant and regular communication. There are a series of contacts through our ARO hearing and the Board of Review. So this is nothing sudden. There have been various stages of contact, so there's no surprises here.
Do you have any further light to shine?
Nothing further, but if this discussion goes a little deeper into the administrative process, I was going to suggest that we go into closed session.
I'm not sure that that's necessary. I just wanted to be sure that this wasn't something that we inadvertently overlooked and could have avoided through adequate communication, but it sounds like we've had that presumably based on what you've just testified to. Okay, thank you.
You know, one thing, and I think when this process was being developed, you assured us that this would be the last resort, that we would take every means and communicate, but when we get to the lien part, that we've exhausted all of our internal processes.
Opportunities, we believe sincerely that the opportunities to resolve it have been presented, and this is definitely what we believe to be the last resort.
One thing, I think you guys, when we went through this, you recommended that we adopt a model much like building and safety, and it goes directly from your shop to the council. And we added this step and wanted to monitor it, and because of so few conflicts, I'd like to have you get with the city attorney and go back to your original concept to where we can change the routing from your department to the council, and we can deal with them, model it after building and safety. Because, again, we've not had but one or two people that even have shown up at Budget and Finance, and generally our response is for them to go back to Office of Finance. You know, if we can get with the city attorney and go back to that original model that you recommended, I think it will facilitate getting these through the system.
Sure, sure.
I certainly will have that discussion.
I have just one. Might as well go for the hat trick and weigh in on this as well. Yeah, something clearly doesn't seem right, that we've exhausted our resources in this particular case. So when this comes to council, can you provide the backup documentation to show that the city is in fact, because it's not, I don't have it here, I have one page on this, that we've done due diligence, that we've gone through?
Councilmember, I'm sorry, but this type of hearing doesn't envision a reopening of the administrative process. It's strictly about the placing of a lien on the property.
I wasn't asking for it to be reopened, and so with all due respect, I would ask again that you bring the documentation with you to council, showing exactly what you've done, what we've done as a city, and that documentation before we go ahead and approve by council a lien in this amount of money.
And this is for number 19. All right. And so again, if we have to go closed session, we'll do that in council. But I'd ask if you go back and look at your original wording that we altered in committee, and that we come up with a more streamlined process. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So we'll move 19 with those instructions.
Okay, this should take us back to item 4. Item 4 was the CA report, the CLA report, city attorney reports, and revised ordinance relative to establishing a citywide administrative citation enforcement program under the management of the Office of City Attorney and creation of a special fund entitled the Code Compliance Fund.
Okay, thank you. What we're going to do is we have a group of cards for that's been identified as for or against this item. As I mentioned earlier, what our intent today is to take testimony from the public comment, also have the CLA come and articulate the substance of their report. Hopefully there have been enough of the reports put out on the table there that you can get access to knowing what those recommendations are. We'd also ask the city attorney to come up at that time so we can discuss these issues, and then with our commitment is to hopefully have the CLA and the city attorney work through the 11 recommendations and have this back at the committee on October the 3rd. Is that our next meeting? Okay, next meeting. Okay, let's start off with the 4, Marion Dodge, and we're going to bring you up 4 at a time. Each of you will get 2 minutes. If you hear somebody that said something, you do not have to feel obligated to repeat it, but certainly you have access to your 2 minutes per card. David Garfinkel, Lois Becker, and that's Mark Stratton. All 4 come to the table.
Marion Dodd had to step out for a minute. She'll be back shortly.
Okay. This is...
Mark Stratton
Oh, that was it. Okay.
stepped out for a minute.
So Mark stepped out also?
He went to get Marion Dodd.
Okay, let's go Nancy Friedman and Marilyn Creel. Why don't you come up? Okay.
My name is David Garfinkel. I'm president of the Tarzana Property Owners Association. We support strongly this proposed ordinance. Currently, violations are very difficult to carry out. Actions against violators are very difficult to carry out. Many are ignored. The only remedy is to go through the criminal system, and the court dismisses most of those as not being worthy of their very tight time. This process is a very simplified, much quicker resolution, provides all of the mechanisms to appeal, and we see no reason that it shouldn't go forward. We urge you to go forward with it. I've reviewed the new city administrative officer's suggestions. We don't have any objection to any of those, so hopefully we can just move forward quickly and get this to the full council.
Thank you very much.
My name is Lois Becker, and I'm here on behalf of Bel Air Skycrest Property Owners Association to express our overwhelming support for the proposed administrative citation enforcement program. In our community, code violations are among the most frequent problems that we face, and the persistence of these violations over many years due to lack of enforcement has significantly degraded the quality of life and safety of our community, and also it has degraded our community's faith in city government, because what good are rules, conditions, ordinances, and codes without enforcement? It's not just our community. Every neighborhood has its issues where enforcement is simply not forthcoming. Here is an opportunity to restore the faith of the electorate. ACE offers a straightforward, timely, and cost-effective way to address these violations that plague our city without clogging up the criminal courts. At a time when so many departments are having to cut back, we are being offered a smart, creative solution that will facilitate the resolution of many more violations than can currently be handled as fully prosecuted misdemeanors. And bottom line, ACE makes sense. We know that comprehensive enforcement programs like it are working successfully in other cities. The sooner this pilot program is launched, the sooner it can prove its worth in Los Angeles. We urge you to advance this matter to full council for adoption ASAP. Thank you.
Let me ask 2 others to come up. Tony Tucci and Florence Capgear. Come up with these 2. You can start.
My name is Marilyn Krell. I am president of South Brentwood Residents Association. We represent over 3,000 residents in South Brentwood. I also sit on the San Vicente Design Review Board. I'm speaking for myself when I say that I was thrilled to originally hear about this plan, I think over a year ago. I hope that you will find that you can include the public works and building and safety violations in this plan sooner than later. I want to say that when some of the businesses ignore or violate municipal and city codes and ordinances, it's not fair to those businesses that do follow the law. And I also want to mention something that I learned about in the past. There was an organization of trained citizen enforcement group who participated in this enforcement problem. Not sure how they were trained, but I do know some people who are former members. And I would hope that you would consider reactivating this kind of a program where we could help out.
Miss, is Tony still here? Tony Trucci? Okay. David Heckler? Stephen Sand. Come on up here.
Hi, I'm Nancy Friedman from the Brentwood Community Council. Thank you for having us. I think it's spectacular, actually, that the city is close to trying this new way to enforce the municipal code. A pilot program is better than nothing at all, and I hope that the pilot program will be expanded on and that it'll be very successful. Presently, the ways are known how to get around this system, and it really needed some fixing, and I'm glad to see that we're jumping up to get this done. A citation is similar to a parking ticket, and it should speed the system and place less burden on the courts. The Brentwood Community Council did pass a resolution in April unanimously to support the motion of Councilman Koretz, the ACE program as a way to make a system more efficient. So I'd like to say that we would like to start now as a city of change. It's healthy, it's wise, and it's professional. And I thank you for taking this up, and I hope it'll be rushed to City Council and passed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Wolfgang, is it Bitz? Come on the end, you can start.
Good afternoon, Councilman. My name is Florence Chapier. I'm Vice President of Lower Mandeville Canyon Association and a member of the Brentwood Community Council. And our association supports entirely this ACE program. We think it will lighten the load of courts and bring resolution to this violation issue faster. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. My name is David Hector. I have a foot in 3 different communities, so I have a good perspective. I reside in Sherman Oaks. I own commercial property in Valley Glen and residential property in North Hollywood, where I'm also a member of the Neighborhood Council. I think this program is a definite step forward. Right now, there's very uneven enforcement, and this is not anything against any particular department, but most of them are somewhat overwhelmed with their normal duties. This takes a lot of lower-level items and moves them into another area of enforcement to make it easier for the departments to triage their enforcement. Currently, what often happens, as was indicated in the LA Times editorial this morning regarding the red light cameras, is that those who know how to kind of get around the system get around it, and those who don't know any better, get kind of encumbered in a larger process. The identifying of specific codes, I think, was a great move forward in this bill, because it does allow the departments to, again, triage their enforcement and, put the faster enforcement that would come under the administrative system into those areas. I believe also with the adjustments that have been made, there is protection for landlords such as myself, because it does say that the responsible party is first the person who causes the problem, and then only secondly, if it continues, then the person who allows it to continue. So I think that's a good safeguard for those of us who sometimes are at the mercy of our different tenants. I would point out, however, that one item that's a real broken windows issue for most communities is barking dogs. Currently, if you call 311, you are referred to animal control. The police don't want to go out on barking dogs, but yet that's kind of blaringly missing as one of the items that's covered by this section. I think if it was allowed to be a citation, it would solve a lot of issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Next two would be Diane Rosen and Roxanne Stern.
Good afternoon, council members, Chairman Parks, and honorable members of the Budget and Finance Committee. My name is Stephen Sand. I'm the chair of the Westwood Community Council. I want to thank you for holding this public hearing and for this opportunity. First of all, I'd also like to note there was a very informative article, if you did not see it, in today's Los Angeles Times, and I have copies here that I would like to submit to the staff so that they can be distributed to each one of you, if possible.
Look at them right behind you.
Thank you. Our council voted actually last spring strongly, overwhelmingly in favor of this common sense proposal, and we want to actually thank our council member Paul Koretz and the other members of the council for bringing this forward. I can tell you as both the chairman of our council and active in our business community, an earlier speaker mentioned the issue of fairness, and I can tell you that is a very important issue because we want to see a level playing field. We have many, many businesses that do things the right way, that go through the proper permit process through building and safety, planning department, and then there are those that don't. And it is just a fundamental unfairness if individuals who violate the law, don't pay their permit fees. It creates a sense of why was I the good guy when 5 people next to me didn't do things correctly. We believe, as I said, this is a common sense approach. We know that it's a proven method in other surrounding cities. I've spoken with colleagues in Culver City, and this has been business as usual in Culver City for a very long time. So we urge you to move this forward, and we also urge that eventually, and as soon as possible, areas like building and safety and street use and public works can be folded in as well. Thank you very much.
Sir?
Yeah, Wolfgang Freit. I've been a founding member of the North Westwood Village Residents Association in 1986. I'm also a member of the Westwood Community Council. I want to thank Councilman Parks and Koretz for bringing this motion forward, and I want to give you my full support. Though I'm a little disappointed, it's a very small kind of a new ordinance. It doesn't include very important departments like building and safety and housing, I understand, because particularly in the North Village, we have a situation where 4 properties have covenants on them in perpetuity, recorded with the county to report biannually that they reduce the rent on 25% of the apartments by 25% to university-related people, and they have to make a report on it. They don't, I think, and there's no enforcement, gives an unfair advantage to those property owners against people who, do charge reasonable rents. Building and safety, I don't understand why it's not included, because they have a very good internal record keeping, and enforcement is not a big issue with them. I'm also concerned with the fact that the funds, the code enforcement funds, is going to be kind of a centrally administrated in the city and not separate to each department, that it's basically the enforcement is a self-funding proposition where basically the fees or the penalties fund the enforcement. So the direct connection. And it's independently funded. They don't have to ask for any other money, and the money doesn't disappear in emergency situations or something like this. And to conclude, I want to say that codes without enforcements are guard dogs with muscles, like guard dogs with muscles, or police cars without wheels, or at least if they're hampered by compromising conditions with square wheels. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next 2 speakers is Robert Chernow and Edward Hunt. Yep.
Good afternoon. I'm Diane Rosen, Chair of the Planning and Land Use Committee of the Encino Neighborhood Council. On April 25th, the Encino Neighborhood Council voted unanimously to support Councilman Koretz's motion with the amendments to the ACE program. This program will maximize public safety efforts and generate revenue for the city's general fund without additional personnel or costs. For brevity, we agree with what's gone before, but in our motion, we listed the departments that would be affected and the code numbers. And that is the Los Angeles the Police Department, Building and Safety, Housing, and that's in our letter to you, and Public Works and Transportation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Roxanne Stern, I represent myself, and everything I wanted to say has been said. I just want to say that I'm very much for this the ACE program, and I hope that you will bring it to vote and get it going soon.
Thank you. So what is your name?
I'm Edward Hunt. I'm here on behalf of the Millworlds.
Excuse me. You're Edward Hunt?
Hunt.
Okay, let me just see if Mr. Chernow is still here. Robert Chernow. Marion Dodge. Mark Stratton. You can come on up. Okay, go ahead.
I'm here on behalf of the Millworlds Hill Neighborhood Association. We're a neighborhood in Hollywood of about 4,500 residents on 400 parcels, about 100 acres near Millworlds, Western, and Santa Monica and the Hollywood Freeway. And we're very much in favor of this approach. We formed our neighborhood association 32 years ago with the idea of supporting people obeying the laws, various laws and ordinances. We pursued that for 32 years. We found it's been helpful. If you look at our neighborhood statistically, we have a lot less violations apparent in the neighborhood. We have much less crime on the various crime maps, and it's been a good strategy. But lately, the last few years, we find that the enforcement is slipping. It's become much less equal. There's been a lot of swallowing elephants and choking on gnats, so to speak. And we're hoping that this enforcement will make it a level playing field and an equal situation for everybody. And we think it's a very common sense approach, and hope that you will move it to the next level for whatever further debate it needs. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Marion Dodge, President of the Federation of Hillside and Canyon Associations. The Federation represents 33 homeowners associations spanning the Santa Monica Mountains, and the Federation enthusiastically supports the Administrative Citation Enforcement Plan. Our communities and their more than 200,000 constituents have long been frustrated by the lack of enforcement of city codes. ACE proposes a reasonable change of procedures that gives the city an extra tool to use without changing the codes or the agency responsible for issuing the citations. Quality of life violations could be handled with a simple citation, which would bring the resulting income directly to the city. This is not a radical new plan, but one that is based on successful programs that are already in operation in such cities as San Diego, Sacramento, and Oakland. ACE is a win-win program that will facilitate the enforcement of municipal codes and reduce the cost of enforcement to the city. The Hillside Federation urges City Council to adopt the ACE plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark Stratton, Basboa, and I'm also Vice President of the Hillside Federation. I want to add to fairness, trust. When municipal code is not adhered to, it undermines the public trust. And I just think this gives the city another tool to see to it that enforcement is engaged. And I would like to see it expanded to include more than the animal services. I want to thank all of you for considering this, and particularly Paul Koretz, and I hope it moves forward quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. For the record, we have Robert Cherno and Tony Tucci are not here. We'll just add their names to the file. We now have a group of those who are opposed to the ordinance. I'd like to start off with Bill Hui, Carol Knapp, Lewis, and then Zumadog. Pardon? Okay. And then Darian, is it Bojo? Come on up.
Should I go first, Councilman?
Yes, sir.
All right. Good evening, members of the City Council. My name is Bill Huey. I'm the president of the Fair Housing Coalition. We're a group of landlords who believe in fairness and equality under the law for landlords and renters. We are totally opposed to this, and I realize a lot of homeowners here think it's a godsend. What they don't know is how the L.A. Housing Department operates. I'm the president of a coalition. I meet with a lot of housing inspectors. I go into buildings where crime is just brewing like coffee, And criminal-type tenants will admit to a housing inspector that, yes, I broke this, yes, I broke that. And they always cite the landlord, and housing inspectors will tell us over and over again, we're not allowed to cite tenants. So this is going to be, if this passes, this is another tool that will be used to harass landlords. 60% of the housing in L.A. is owned by mom and pops, people who own 10 units or less, people who work all their life to have a little extra money in their retirement. Right now, 1,700 landlords are in REAP, where the city's taking away their rent money. Most of these landlords are going bankrupt. This creates slums, this creates crime, and housing inspectors will not cite renters. So if there's a code violation out front, if there's garbage out front, broken car parts, or whatever, they're going to use this to cite the landlord. And the weird and extremely unfair thing here is that tenants can commit code violations that will put a landlord in REAP, where the city confiscates his rent money, then he goes bankrupt, then he loses the building, and all during the process, the city doesn't give the landlord to evict the tenant that caused all this problem. There's no balance in there's no balance in the law here. I mean, look, we're landlords. We do not hate renters. They're our customers. But there's a percentage of bad people. There are a percentage of bad landlords, like they're bad doctors or priests or whatever, and there's a percentage of bad tenants. But this tool is going to be used to cite landlords. The LHD is an anti-landlord organization. I've had inspectors confide in me. They have quotas to meet, and if they don't meet the quotas, they'll get demoted, they'll get fired, they'll get transferred. We can't let this pass until you clean up the housing department.
Thank you. Ma'am?
My name is Carol Knapp. I'm just representing myself. You all are bound and determined to destroy the last vestiges of the Bill of Rights. The Fifth Amendment due process talks about notice and opportunity to be heard before deprivation of life, liberty, property. Before, not after. And I got a parking ticket that went to $100 because I was one day late. This is going to be used as an abuse. Where's our check and balance system? The legislative branch is now the judicial branch. Who do you think you are? They use strict liability for code violations within an apartment so that the landlord can be cited and fined. And this is going to extend the abuse. Why do you think the buildings are in disrepair? Look how you've destroyed this city. You've destroyed our economy. Some of you destroyed it in Sacramento and then came down here to finish it off. We have the second highest unemployment rate in the entire nation in this city because of y'all and how you abuse the rule of law and subvert it. These draconian code ordinances are used to, quote, legally swindle property from little old ladies. And you people should be ashamed of yourself, especially the neighborhood councils, pitting citizen against citizen. They did this in Nazi Germany. And they gave them a little bar of soap when they marched them to the gas chambers so they'd think they were going to the showers. And I see all these people with their little bar of soap marching toward fascism. You people are acting as fascists. And why? To put more money in the gaping maw of politicians and bureaucrats.
Hi, my name is Louis. I'm a property owner in the city of LA. I'm strongly opposed to this ordinance called ACE. Whoever thought of the name was some twisted, demented, you know what. As a housing provider, I have inspections constantly. I get cited for tenants' damage. For example, smoke detectors, I get cited for. Even though it's always the tenant's fault, I get cited for because in LA we have strict liability, which is a federal, judgment. So that means any tenant damage, the responsibility is given to the landlord. I highly recommend that you don't pass this. The reason is currently there's an FBI investigation going on in the city of LA in the housing department under the systematic code enforcement program. They have been misusing that program for the past 10 years since it's been going on. Housing inspectors come to us because they're too scared to tell anyone else what's going on there. They say the city of LA has a plan to become a mega landlord. Currently, Restore Neighborhoods LA is a program to get properties that are in REAP and transfer it to the city of LA as affordable housing. This ACE program will just further embolden them to cite landlords, steal their money, steal their property. As a business owner and property owner in the city of LA, I'm going to work as quickly as possible to leave the city of LA because there are no more businesses here. I don't think, to people complaining about the businesses with signs, I mean, don't you have anything else to do? Let people make money in the city at least, and then concentrate on something else.
Okay. Let me ask three more people to come up. We can have you have those seats there. Lee Pasternak, Jose Torres, and I have a card. Marion Torres, your card's in, but you do not want to speak. Is that true? Is Marion still here?
Good afternoon. I'm Darian Bourgeau. I'm an attorney. My husband, Lee Pasternak, and I have a hotel apartment building near Koreatown. And I requested notice about this ACE program for some time, sending emails to Miss Monique and somebody else, making calls, never getting any response. Only found out about this by chance. The real problem, I'm not against an ACE program, but I'm against this one because it doesn't go far enough. It pretends that it's going to give an alternative to criminal enforcement, but it just gives something additional so that not only is there power abuse under the criminal system, and there is, but there's also an additional avenue for abuse, huge fines, and what I read is that the city attorney's office wanted to collect attorney's fees from people when they even remedied a code violation. That's insane. They don't even allow you to get attorney's fees against a defendant in a criminal case or in most civil cases unless there's a particular contract. The real problem in Los Angeles is the case of People versus Bachrach. It's a strict liability case that was touched on here, and under it, the city attorney's office takes a position that any code violation on any property, they can go ahead and start a criminal prosecution. They don't have to give you notice. They don't have to give you an opportunity to fix it. Mr. Koretz, I wish you'd listen to this because it's very important, and you too. There's no due process.
Discussing what you were saying. So
oh, good. Okay, well, then I take it all back. I want to provide you copies of the People versus Bachrach case. It's unconstitutional. It was decided by the lowest appellate division there is, that's part of the Los Angeles Municipal Court, and it basically means that you don't get a notice, you don't get an opportunity to cure, you're a criminal, thousands of dollars in fines, it is the worst, and then it's used to abuse power by deputy city attorneys who have a personal agenda, and it is a horror. But I would like a really good ACE program that was a real alternative with reasonable fees and fairness, and where the city attorney's office did not control it, but we're a participant, and it was judged independently. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pess.
Thank you for allowing us to speak.
Let me give your name, please.
My name is Lee Pasternak, okay. And we have been property owners in Los Angeles for over 30 years. We're currently against the ordinance the way it's drafted, having legislation that does not allow the city attorney's office, or that currently allows the city attorney's office to rely on the Bachrach case that my wife mentioned, and the misuse of the criminal strict liability, requesting property owners who want to comply with code violations and who in fact timely comply but are criminally prosecuted and fined, is the largest abuse of power in the city today. That's why we need limitations, checks and balances, and in the drafting of this ordinance that must exist. We do not have that today. As it stands today, we have abuse of power and personal agendas for personal gain and political ambition permeating our community at the present time, and it does not create an atmosphere of harmony between the city officials and the public at large. Notice and compliance needs to be involved and not criminal prosecution. Allowing this new ordinance to go through the way it is currently drafted would continue to allow the power abuse and would take the law enforcement out of the courts and place it solely in the hands of the prosecutors, giving way to the creation of a police state that would continue driving business from our borders and also getting rid of sorely needed jobs, and also our city revenues that would generate from these jobs and businesses are gone, and that's why we're in the predicament we're in today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Buenas tardes.
Let me just, is Marion?
Yeah.
Is this Marion?
No, just my wife Maria.
All right, let me get, Maria, did you put a card in?
Yeah, she put a card.
Maria, but you now want to speak? No? Okay, all right, just be, okay, very good. Okay, Jose.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Mi nombre es José Manuel Torres.
My name is
Mi
José Manuel
esposa
Torres and my wife,
Y yo hemos vivido por más de 30 años en la misma comunidad.
and I have lived in
Solo
the same
casas
community for over 30
por
years. Just
Me gustaría representar a las personas que hoy,
right next to each other. Continúe.
a las personas que hoy andan trabajando y no tienen la voz para venir ante ustedes.
I would like to represent, I'm here to represent the people who are currently working today and they don't have the voice or the time to be able to come or the opportunity to come and speak here in front of you today.
Y que van a ser afectadas directas o indirectamente por la ley que ustedes intentan pasar.
And these community members are going to be affected directly or indirectly by the motion that you are considering approving.
Ahora, precisamente, estamos en problemas porque ciertamente una persona o dos
Currently, we're in a problematic situation because with certainty, one or two people
no les gusta el sistema o la forma en que uno trata de vivir.
do not like the system or the way one tries to live.
Vivimos nosotros en una comunidad donde existe una pandilla. Okay, una pandilla la más peligrosa y sangrienta en todo el mundo.
We currently live in a community where there's a very dangerous and bloody gang, and that's their territory. It's one of the bloodiest in the nation.
Llamada la MS.
It's
Lo
called,
único que estamos tratando de hacer es proteger nuestra familia.
that gang is called MS. And the only thing we're trying to do is to protect our family.
Y por eso hemos sido citados. Un ejemplo de lo que puede suceder con ellos es que hemos sido citados por tener una barda alta.
And that's how we received a citation. Why do we receive a citation? Is because our fence is high. The height is very high.
Not too high, solo 6 pies.
It's not very high, it's only 6 feet. in
Y
height.
ha sido inspeccionada por policías, señores policías, agentes de la seguridad, miembros del consejero del Distrito 13, señor Garcete, y no encontramos ninguna forma que pueda herir a alguien o poner en peligro a los peatones.
Police officers and inspectors and also personnel from Council District 13, they have gone over and looked at the height of the gate that we have, and they've concluded that this is in no way dangerous to harm or hurt any pedestrian that walks by.
Ahora imaginémonos un perro ladrando y si yo como mal vecino le pongo el dedo a otro y le van a dar una citación solo porque un perro ladra de $500, ¿es eso justo? No.
Now, let's think about a nuisance of a dog barking. I am going to tattletale on that neighbor, and because of being a bad neighbor, they're going to come, they're going to give a citation to my neighbor that can be up to about $500. You call that being a good neighbor? I don't think so.
En conclusión, me gustaría que esto no lo pasaran, por favor. Gracias.
And finally, I would like to respectfully ask you to please not approve this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. And Maria, you're not going to speak.
María, ¿usted no va a hablar? ¿No?
Let me ask
No.
Lourdes Guzman, Leopold Gonzalez, Christine Garcia.
Como usted guste.
Did you-
Dijo, como usted guste, señora. Dice que si quiere o no quiere.
Did you-
Okay, I will talk then.
Okay, and you're Maria?
¿Usted es María,
Okay,
señora?
go ahead.
Mi nombre es María Torres y he vivido por 38 años en la Monroe Street.
My name is María Torres. I lived on Monroe Street for 38 years.
Y quisiera, pues, por la razón que tenemos el problema con el cerco es por la seguridad, y necesitamos la seguridad porque tenemos nuestros nietos pequeños y hay muchas personas malas alrededor.
The reason why we have the gate at the height that we have is for safety reasons, security reasons. There's a lot of bad people in that neighborhood, and we have our grandchildren that play around there, and that's why we want security for them.
Y pues quisiéramos que la ciudad pues fuera justa y pues nos diera la oportunidad de mantener los cercos así como los tenemos.
We would like to ask the city to please be fair and allow us to maintain the height of our fences just like we have it, and that's for safety reasons.
Y pues espero que sea razonable ellos y sepan decidir lo que sea más correcto.
And I ask you to please be reasonable and try to decide on what's correct and fair.
Thank you very much.
That's all. Gracias, señor.
Hello, my name is Christine. I am here on behalf of my father, and I am a member of the East Hollywood Neighborhood
You're
City
Christine
Council.
Garcia?
Yes, correct. Many of us got non-compliance fees because we put fences for the protection of our families. When they're treating us like criminals, and the criminals are having the time of their lives. In my neighborhood, there are crimes, shootings, and I have been burglarized more than 3 times. To me, that is not fair. So I am here to say the current situation is bad, and it would get worse under the ACE program unless you change it to focus on public safety. Thank you very much.
Walter? Okay?
Yes.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
All right. Let me ask Raul Munoz.
No, Leopoldo González.
Pardon?
Leopoldo González.
Okay, Leopold. I think I got you here somewhere. Oh, here we go. Leopold Gonzalez?
Yes.
All right, go ahead. And then let me
Okay.
just bring up a couple other people. Is it Lourdes Guzman? Okay, you don't want to speak. All right, you're just in the record. And then Raul Munoz, and then NC Box and Stephen Box. Come up right here. Okay, go ahead.
Mi nombre es Leopoldo González
My name is Leopoldo González.
y vivo entre la calle Wilton y la Monroe.
I live between the streets of Wilton and Monroe.
Yo apenas he llegado a vivir como unos 6 años,
I've only been living there for around 6 years,
pero veo que sí hay bastante irregularidades.
but I do see that there's a lot of irregularities.
Hay, como dicen los vecinos, que ha habido balaceras
As my neighbors have mentioned previously, there's been a lot of shootings,
y uno necesita la protección no solamente para uno, sino para la familia, para nuestros hijos.
and we really need the protection, not necessarily just for ourselves, but also for families, our children, and other families in the
Y
area.
por ese motivo no nos pueden dar unas multas de la ciudad
And this is the reason why the city cannot continuously give us citations
sin saber el por qué
without knowing the real reason
están
why
las protecciones.
the fences are that high and why we're using them as protection.
Porque yo me opongo a esta ley que pone la ciudad,
I'm
o
against
el
this,
building,
I'm against this proposed ordinance that the city is considering,
porque no hay razón para llegar a tan a fondo de una casa,
because there's no reason why to go this deep into the reasons why homeowners or
Y
renters go this far.
y aparte de eso, nomás saben unas cuantas personas de este programa que están queriendo imponer.
As a matter of fact, only a very small number of people have knowledge about this proposed ordinance that you're considering.
Saben unos cuantos y la demás comunidad no sabe nada de eso.
Only very few people, once again, know about this proposed ordinance that you're considering, and the rest of the community have no knowledge about this.
Hay ese señor que ha hablado hace rato, él dice que hay 4,000 personas que saben que están aprobados están apoyándole a él. Y eso es mentira. Yo vivo en esa comunidad y nunca nos han avisado de
This
eso.
man who spoke earlier, who said there's about 4,000 people of his neighbors in his community who know about this proposed ordinance, that know about it, that's a lie, because I live in that community and I knew nothing about it.
Me opongo a esa ley.
I am
Gracias.
against this proposed ordinance. Thank you.
Mr. Núñez.
Muy buenas tardes, mi nombre es Raúl Muñoz.
Good afternoon. My name is Raúl Muñoz.
Vengo a oponerme al enforzamiento que quieren programar ustedes hoy.
I'm here against this proposed code enforcement that you're considering today.
Pido tomen en cuenta la seguridad de mi familia, de todas las familias que necesitamos seguridad en altos riesgos, poblaciones de altos riesgos.
I ask you to please consider us families and the other families who are in situations and who live in communities that are very high-risk communities. Please consider our safety.
Yo quiero seguir viviendo en la misma comunidad, toda mi familia ha vivido ahí.
I want to continue living in the same communities as my whole family has been living there as well.
No quiero seguir las recomendaciones de una empleada de nuestro concejal que me pidió que si no me gustaba me volviera de ahí.
I do not want to follow the suggestion given by one of my council members' staff who suggested that if I didn't like it there, then I should move out of that area.
Yo tengo un fence alto.
I have a high fence.
2 veces he sido multado.
And I've been cited twice.
Lo puse yo ese fence después de que por poco le quitan la vida a uno de mis hijos.
I installed that fence after an incident that almost killed my son.
El criminal salió de la cárcel para irme a tocar la puerta y pedirme disculpas.
The criminal came out of jail, came to my door, knocked, and asked for an apology, and gave me an apology.
La persona que nosotros nos reportó a Building and Safety tiene años viviendo en la comunidad, no de nosotros.
The person who reported us to Building and Safety has been living in the community for years, but not in our community.
Yo lo confronté a él y pedí por qué venía él a nuestra comunidad altamente latina, por qué no se enfocaba en su área donde hay fences altos.
I confronted him and asked him why would he come to our community, where he doesn't live. In our community, there's mostly Hispanic community members. Why doesn't he focus instead in his community, in which they have very high fences?
Yo quisiera vivir en Beverly Hills, en áreas donde no es necesario tener esas partes. No tengo el dinero para sobrevivir en esas áreas.
Of
Por eso
course,
estoy aquí.
I would definitely like to live in areas like Beverly Hills where this type of situations or fencing for safety reasons would not be necessary. Unfortunately, I don't have the means nor funds to live in areas like that.
Exijo tomen en cuenta las áreas donde vivimos, donde hay alta criminalidad y que se puede vivir sin fence y no se puede vivir sin un fence o una alto cerco, vamos a decir así.
I ask you to please, and I ask you to please consider the areas where we live in, where you cannot live and feel safe without this type of protection, such as high fences. Consider this and compare to other areas where you can live without this type of security measures, such as high fences like we have to have.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is NC Box. Thank you very much for having us here. I live in Hollywood with my husband and my unborn child, and I'm here because the city of LA treats its residents as if they're criminals, while it treats its criminals as if they're invisible. The people who live in my neighborhood have been subject to the city's selective enforcement of its laws and codes in a complaint-driven system that fails to address the community as a whole and instead allows itself to be used by individuals as a destructive weapon against its neighbors. The ACE program does not apply justice. In fact, it violates our rights of due process and treats us as if we were ATM or cash machines whose only function is to balance the city's budget through fines and penalties and fees, which then somehow seems to correct any perceived violation. I'm here with my neighbors and my family to urge you to reject the proposed administrative citation enforcement program. I'm here to ask you to treat the residents with respect they deserve. I'm here to ask you to support public safety by going after the criminals who terrorize our neighborhoods, not by going after residents who try to protect themselves by building over-in-height fences out of desperation. I'm here to ask you to reject the administrative citation enforcement program and put the priority back on public safety where it belongs. Thank you.
Well, now, you know, I came here today and I see friends from all over the city, from Westwood, from Encino, from Bel Air, Beverly Crest, and I know them and their neighborhoods well, and in fact, I have participated in many neighbor councils throughout the city. And in many ways, we have a lot in common, but in many ways, the neighborhoods are very, very different. For example, in East Hollywood, we don't have a design board. What we have is a gang injunction. And so all summer long, we walked the streets of East Hollywood every week. The first week, the police showed up and told us not to. After all, it's not safe. And this is the neighborhood that is receiving, by a ratio of 60 to 1, citations from building and safety because of a complaint-driven city, which will now be given steroids under the ACE program. The simple reality is this: it's an uneven application of the law. It allows the city attorney to go through the process, and then if they fail, to get a second chance. Just saying it's not about the money doesn't make it true. Just saying it works in other cities doesn't make it true. Complaints went up in Santa Monica as a result of their ACE program. Bell had an ACE program. So the important thing to remember is that just saying it's about decriminalizing these citations forgets the fact that not paying your fee becomes a criminal act. So what you've done is you've just moved the criminal element of our citations to not giving more money, and the fees are being escalated. So behind me are people that already have liens and garnishment threats from the city attorney, fines and fees and penalties of $325, $550, $1925, and then $4,800, all because they sought to protect their family. So the current system's not working. Ramping it up doesn't fix the problem, and you have an obligation to fix the people, the innocent people who get caught in this swiftly moving web that's moving much too fast. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The last card we have is Hollywood resident with no name, so we just put that in file. And it's Zumadog was the only person that was not here, so we put his name in file. Mr. Woodberg, I'm sorry we had your card mixed up again, so I'd ask you to come up at this time. You should have been a part of for the proposal.
Thank you. I'm here representing the Pacific Palisades Community Council. Our chairman, Janet Turner, is doing community service. She's on jury duty. She's asked me to represent the council today on this. I want to point out that our council has received over the years many complaints from the public about a lack of code enforcement of certain quality of life issues. Code enforcement is woefully underfunded. Our Board of Governors discussed this proposal in depth. Based on the discussion, the board voted overwhelmingly to support the objectives of ACE. The context of the board discussion and their support specifically included provisions for sign violations, building and zoning violations, quality of life, and the establishment of a trust fund for proceeds. Basically, the CLA report, as I read it, seeks to strip out most of the things which caused our community to support ACE. Please, in the future, it would be nice if we had more than 72 hours or more than 72 minutes to review the CLA report. Also, I note that the city attorney report on the desk has one date, and that the CLA analysis of the city attorney report is analyzing a report of a different date. So I don't know what the difference is. I couldn't figure that out in the time. Basically, then, our recommendations that all listed code sections and departments be retained in the draft, and the trust fund be retained to be a source of funds to cover enforcement costs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I have the CLA and also the city attorney come up to the table, please?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Roy Morales with the CLA. 18 months ago, Councilman Koretz introduced a motion, seconded by yourself, to create the Administrative Citation Enforcement Program. There have been 2 hearings in the Budget and Finance Committee on this proposal, one in August 2010 and the most recent one, April 2011. And as a result of the April 2011 hearing, this committee gave instructions for the preparation of a revised draft ordinance dated June 27th, 2011, which is what we have on the council file, which is what we took a look at. We took a look at that ordinance to confirm that the draft ordinance, in our opinion, matched with what we believe to be the intent of this committee when the instructions were given. We reviewed the tapes, we reviewed written documentation just to confirm that. And what you have before you is a report dated September 26th that has a series of 14 recommendations. These recommendations are some are technical changes, some are policy changes, which we believe would, if you approve these changes, would make this ordinance consistent with the instructions that were given at the April 2011 hearing. One of the main ones that we talk about is recommendation number 1, which was creation of turning this into a pilot program. And I can go through each of these recommendations if you'd like. Okay. Quickly, recommendation number 1, there was an extensive discussion on April 11th about how broad this program should be. And the consensus, after reviewing the tapes, was that this committee would like to begin this program as a pilot program with LAPD, Housing Department, and the Animal Services Department as the first 3 entities that would be included in the pilot. That was a motion that was made, I believe, by Mr. Koretz, and it appeared that it sounded like the consensus was that the committee approved that. So when we reviewed the language in the city attorney's report, it was consistent with that, but it was a little broader than we expected it to be. In fact, it did not specify that these entities would be the first 3 and that any additions to this program would be approved by the council. There was every intent by this committee that any participation by any city departments or the enforcement of any of the municipal code sections should come through the council for confirmation that the ACE program should be used for enforcement. Recommendation number 2 is with regard to the definition of administrative hearing officers. Administrative hearing officers will be the individuals who will be administering the hearings for any citation that's issued. It is an important position within the entire program, and we believe it is critical that a specific definition of who will be the administrative hearing officers should be included, should be codified, so that we all know who these individuals will be. And it's our understanding that the city attorneys has made a commitment these would be independent, neutral parties outside of the city attorney's office, but we would like to have that clarified and codified in the ordinance. Our third recommendation is with regard to the definition of enforcement officers. On page 3 of the ordinance, there is a definition. Currently, that definition includes the city attorney's investigators, or inspectors, I believe they're called. What that essentially would do is would allow city attorney inspectors to issue administrative citations for any of the violations that they would see, municipal code violations. While that may or may not be the intent of the program, we believe that in the pilot phase, that would not be our recommendation. We need to get a handle on how large this program is and how the specialty inspectors would use this. The housing inspectors, the LAPD officers would use this program to determine the workload. So we would recommend removing, at this point, the city attorney's inspectors from the definition of enforcement officer. That is recommendation number 3. Recommendation number 4 deals with the code compliance fund. This committee made it clear at the hearing and in the prior hearing, the intent to have the Code Compliance Fund created so that the revenues and expenses from the program should be in one place. However, the intent was to have control of that fund, which is allocation of revenue from that fund, to be done in the same manner as any other budget allocation, which is by council and mayor action. The city attorney's clarified for me the way the language was written, and I believe we're very close. There's just some minor technical changes. I believe that would make us comfortable with the language as written. In our opinion, our original reading of it appeared to have additional, for lack of a better term, strings attached to the funding. However, on a closer reading, it is clear that the allocations will be subject to council and mayor approval, as with any other budget allocation. There are some minor changes that we will discuss with the city attorney with your approval. Recommendation number 5 deals with the conversion of existing misdemeanor cases. Mr. Parks, Councilman Parks, brought up the issue of approximately 10,000 cases that are currently on file with the city attorney's office that are misdemeanors, that this committee wanted to give the city attorney the authority to convert those to administrative citations. Subsequent to the hearing, the city attorney made it clear they have that authorization, so there is no change necessary. Our recommendation number 6 deals with the intent of the program. One of the issues that's been brought up both in the press and in this committee is that this program is intended to solve problems. It's not intended to generate revenue. It's not intended to go after anybody. And that the legislative intent of the program is well written in the current draft. However, we have some suggestions. We took a look at about a dozen different ordinances throughout California to try and get a sense of what would be some clear language that we could suggest to make it clear that this program has a specific intent of giving an alternative enforcement mechanism for city departments to use to solve municipal code violations. It is not intended to be a revenue generator, and that is what that language is before you under recommendation 6. It is suggested language. Components of that can be incorporated into the existing preamble, or we can work completely with the city attorney. Recommendation number 7 is with regard to status reports. This committee wanted to have status reports from the city attorney during the implementation of the pilot phase. We recommend that initially they be on a bi-monthly basis so that we know what the workload will be. We know what the case on both the city attorney and on city departments as well. We also want to have a good idea of the staffing levels that are attributed to this program and the cost and revenue figures, so that we can have a good idea of the pilot phase of this program before this council, the committee and this council considers moving forward with expansion. Under number 8, this is an issue that was raised by the city attorney's office, and it was an issue that has not been discussed in the committee. It's the collection of the ACE citation fines. What we have discussed with the Office of Finance is that there are existing mechanisms for collection of certain fees and fines citywide. And what we would like to do is work with the CAO and the Office of Finance and get together and figure out what are the current collection mechanisms, because we've had extensive discussions in this city about accounts receivable, the collection sheriff, and how to best collect the revenues that are due to the city. And what we would like to do is get your approval to discuss this and determine what portions of the outstanding or the proposed administrative citations should be collected by the Office of Finance, and what would be the workload that would entail. In addition, we would like to determine what other existing mechanisms there are for collections and bring that all before you so you can choose how to move forward with the collection mechanism. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is that the collection of the fines is very, very important. So we'd like to clarify that. The recommendation number 9 deals with the level of the fines and penalties that are currently in the draft ordinance. The chair and the committee expressed some concern about how high they were. We wanted to just ensure consistency of the proposed fees and fines with existing law if they do exist. That is what recommendation number 9 is about. Recommendation number 10 deals with the policies and procedures of this system. As written currently, the city attorney will have the authority to develop the written policies and procedures for hearings and appeals. and for the selection and appointment of the administrative hearing officers. We believe it is important that the City Council have the opportunity to review those policies and procedures before they are implemented. I'll leave it at that. With regard to recommendation number 11, this was brought up with regard to existing hearing processes. The Housing Department and various city departments currently have, LADOT is another good example, currently have an extensive hearing system for their citations, for the violations of municipal codes under their jurisdiction. We would like to coordinate with the CAO to determine which, if any of those, are possible venues for processing of administrative citations. We'll bring that before you to this committee to give you recommendations as to whether or not any of these ACE citations can be funneled into the existing systems. This is important because what we're trying to do is minimize the cost of the program, the administrative costs, at the same time use the existing expertise that's out there. There's a technical change with regard to the initial review process, and we've discussed this with the city attorney. This is on recommendation 12. It's simply the fact that if the strict reading of the ordinance appears that you can either approve, the city attorney can either approve in their initial review that administrative citation is valid or that it is not valid, and there isn't the opportunity to approve a valid citation but use the alternative mechanisms. In that same section, they do discuss the alternative mechanisms that are available. They call them available remedies, and we would just want to make it clear that it is an option for the city attorney to use if they validate a administrative citation. Number 13 is a technical change for those individuals who are filing a hardship declaration, financial hardship declaration, and we believe that that filing that declaration under penalty of perjury is adequate. It is what is also used in our traffic citations and in other city systems. Notarizing, we believe, is unnecessary. And the final recommendation is with regard to the authority to issue subpoenas. There have been extensive discussions with regard to this, and we bring before you some of the background information for you to consider. It was our initial impression that the existing law, based on our discussions with the city attorney's office, that existing law gave this authority to the city attorney and to the individuals who are anticipated to be administrative hearing officers, and we therefore believe that it was unnecessary in the pilot program. However, we bring this forward to you for discussions. I understand from the city attorney there's some further clarification on this particular issue.
Yes, if I may. William Carter, Chief Deputy, City Attorney's Office. Good afternoon, Chairman Parks and other honorable members of the committee. I have with me here today Chief of our Civil Branch, Pete Echeverria. Next to Mr. Echeverria is Tina Hess, who is the Deputy Chief of our Special Operations. And then also next to Tina is Deputy Chief Mary Claire Mullador, both of whom were extensively involved in working with Councilman Koretz and his staff on drafting of the language of the ACE ordinance as you currently see it. And I want to thank Councilman Koretz and Councilman Parks for bringing this motion, and for the CLA and others in CAO working with us on getting this language. I also want to recognize, I believe there are at least 2 representatives of LAPD who are here today. I can't speak for them, but I understand that they are here in support on behalf of Chief Pasinger and others. And that's Lieutenant Christine Chowley and Officer David Parker, who I think are here. I want to thank them for attending here today. As you may or may not know, I've been a criminal prosecutor for over 25 years. I prosecuted both felonies and misdemeanors. I've sent people to federal and state prison for many serious crimes. I've been a federal, state, county, and a local prosecutor. Having said that, in every one of those jurisdictions I've worked in, there's been a non-criminal alternative, except when I came to the City of Los Angeles. And in the City of Los Angeles, we have an all-or-nothing proposition. Someone commits a city code violation, you either prosecute them criminally or you do nothing. And given the state of our budget, our resources, and the court staff, it just made a lot of sense, I thought, that there should be a non-criminal alternative like there are in thousands of other jurisdictions across the country. And I agree with those people here today that are opposing this ordinance, that in the circumstances that they've described, they should not be criminals. And that's exactly what ACE does. It gives us an alternative so that they are not charged and convicted as criminals. This ordinance does not create any new crimes. In fact, what it does, it makes a non-criminal alternative to, as Councilman Parks and Councilman Koretz and others have mentioned, we want just the problem to be resolved. And if it can be resolved in a way that is non-criminal and takes it out of the courts and puts it into a due process situation that, if necessary, can go to the courts as a last resort, I think that creates public safety. Having said that, I will add that this office has no objections to the vast majority or comments to the vast majority of the recommendations. We do have a few comments to some. I will defer to Pete Echeverria and Tina and MC to the extent they need to comment. With respect to recommendation number 1, we understand that this will be a pilot project, and we understand looks like it would start with LAPD, perhaps housing, at some point animal services, and Department of Building and Safety. That's certainly a policy consideration that the committee and the council have to make, so we defer obviously to this policymakers. With respect to the number of citations or violations that would be subject to ACE, the comment we would have is, rather than having a list limitation, which I believe is attached to the CLA's report, it lists a number of, I think it's attachment 1. Our thought and suggestion would be, let LAPD or let the particular department that is going to be designated to start in the pilot project, let that particular department decide which LAMC codes would be subject to ACE in their discretion. There are some things that are not on this list that perhaps should be on the list, and it's a long list, but I think LAPD as a law enforcement agency could probably do a better job than we as a city attorney's office could do to identify what is more important for them when they see it on the street. And with that, I will defer to Pete Echeverria as to any other comments he has with respect to the 14 recommendations.
And if I may, only to follow up on that point, that's not to say that it would preclude you and the council receiving a full list of the sections that would be enforced by a department. And I understand, for example, the recommendation today is that with animal services that the licensing violations be enforced, not the barking dog violations. There's a separate process already in existence for that. So those kinds of decisions do need to be made, and we recognize that, and we would so draft the ordinance. The thought here is that and we don't believe it's the intent to limit a department's enforcement of particular violations by a list that's submitted to council and is otherwise approved, but rather by all the violations that they were otherwise enforced, except those that are specifically carved out through a policy decision. So we await your guidance on that. The tack that we had taken, I personally had taken in drafting this draft that's before you, was to have a phased implementation, a one-by-one department, and report to you each time a department was added. We recognize that you might wish to add start with 3 departments, and that's fine, and then specify what those departments are, and then we would report to you as departments were to be added. So that's it's entirely consistent with that, and your guidance is welcome in that regard.
And with one follow-up, I know that we have been working with other council members, in particular Councilman Weezar. He made some suggestions about adding other types of violations that might come through with the pilot project, or adding historical and cultural structures. That certainly is something that could be added at some point as the pilot project progresses, but we'd be more than happy to work with Councilman Koretz, Councilman Parks, and others on the council as the pilot project moves forward, to identify maybe more specific, unique types of violations that could be added.
Did you want us to go through each of the recommendations and give our comments, or do you want to discuss one at a time?
Well, the thing is, if you have comments on each one, fine. We'd love to hear your comments. If
On the
there's
balance
no
of the-
disagreement, you can
On the
just-
balance of the recommendation?
Yeah. If there's no disagreements, then we could assume you concur.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll go quickly through. Then, with respect to recommendation number 2, we're in agreement with it, as well as with number 3. With respect to recommendation number 4, which is whether the language in the ordinance, in fact, gives the council and the mayor full control over the funds, I believe that it does. It's written in order to accomplish that, and I've gone through it word for word. None of those funds can be moved out of that fund except through a budgetary action. That's not necessarily in conjunction with the budget. As you well know, there are budgetary actions taken pretty much every day council meets. So council would have control over all of the funds. The only exception to that would be the funds that are received as a deposit, as like a fine, a bail that's posted, and when the hearing is held, if the finding is for the applicant, then the money goes back to them. Then, if it does not, and the decision is against them, then the money goes into the fund, subject to the control of the council, into the general fund. It's as simple as that, and I think it's clearly written that way. We'll discuss it further with the CLA to help them understand it. With respect to item 5, there's no recommendation, so that's fine. With respect to item 6, clarifying the intent of the program, we will work with the CLA and come back to you with wording that is recommended by them as well as us. And I think that would be some relatively minor changes to the purpose section of the ordinance. With respect to items 7, we're fine with that. We would request the reporting be required to be quarterly rather than bi-monthly. Particularly our financial statistics we report, as you have reports done to you, the quarterly financial reports. We would request that be done quarterly. Item 8, or instruction number 8, we'll work with the CLA regarding that as well. Options for building and collection of the ACE program. The CAO and CLA will work on it, and we will work as they need us to assist them in that regard as well. And the same applies to recommendation number 9, the penalties. The ordinance already provides, with respect to violations where there's an infraction, that we're limited by either the provisions in our own code or in state law. We will walk through them with how the other penalties were calculated and whether or not there's other controlling law that applies, or what the policy decision would be there, so they can come back. We can all come back with a recommendation for you. So we'll work with them on number 9. Number 10, we agree with. Number 11, the CLA is addressing that as well regarding the various hearing processes and what recommendations they might make for an alternative use of those. Number 12, we agree with that as well. We believe that it is clear that our office has the option when a matter is brought forth as an administrative code enforcement matter and there's an alternative, and that in effect is rejected, and the alternative is to file either a misdemeanor or an infraction. We believe we have that authority as prosecutorial discretion, but we'll make that clear in the subsection C. Item 13, we're fine deleting the language requiring the declaration under penalty of perjury. And item 14, there's simply, I think, a misunderstanding about what state law provides with respect to authorization for subpoenas. Now, it may be that the council, this body, will decide that the hearing officers should not have the power to have subpoenas, to issue subpoenas. However, that is included really for protection against the people who've been cited. They may not have the wherewithal or the ability to obtain documents and information that they need to prove their case, and the hearing officer would have the discretion, not our office, not any other city official, but the hearing officer would have discretion to issue subpoenas.
That's an important point. The person who's been cited has the authority to issue subpoenas, so he or she can defend him or herself. That's the important point that should be made.
And the authority that exists in state law is an enabling authority for the city to then authorize the hearing officers to have exercise that power. It needs to be included in the ordinance if the hearing officers will have it. It's not directly from the state. So with that, if they're to have that authority, there should be no change unless you want to recommend a change to the council that they not have that authority at all. That's the comments.
Yeah, I don't have any questions, but I do have a lot of comments and a lot of notes after all the things we've heard. First of all, at this point, we all know why we need this program. We have a costly and completely inefficient enforcement system here in LA, and we need to protect the quality of life. At the same time, we need to protect taxpayer resources. Our current system does neither one, and the proposed ACE system is intended to do both. And that's, in fact, why this committee already improved the program. I proposed this program over a year ago because as I went from community group to community group, each one, and these are very different neighborhoods and very different needs, they all had a desire for a quality of life enforcement of city codes, and they were all extremely frustrated with our current system that we all know doesn't work very well. This proposed program decriminalizes minor violations, keeps them out of the court system, but also streamlines enforcement. And under this program of a violation, whether it be for building a deck without permits or noise violations at a party house, the violator's given a ticket, they have the opportunity to pay a penalty, cure the violation, and move on with their life. It generally will be better for the violator and everyone else involved. This means enforcement fines will pay for the cost of enforcement, as opposed to taxpayers who are not the ones responsible. The people who are actually violating will pay for the enforcement. Enforcement will be resolved quickly and not clog the court system, which is more efficient for the city's resources, more humane for the violator, and both faster and more effective for the community that's impacted by all these quality of life violations. Now, I know this program is not without its critics, and we heard a few today, and so I'll address some of those criticisms briefly and suggest how we move forward. First of all, this is a program that was intended to start small, given some council resistance, given some community resistance. I recommended, and I'm still recommending, a program that starts just with the LAPD. And I tried to clarify that at the last hearing. I think that was misinterpreted. I think we should take the next steps after that and add housing and animal services and Mr. Weezar's historic suggestions as the next step as we add to the pilot program. But for now, I think we should just do LAPD. I don't think we've heard any controversy over the violations that LAPD typically enforces, such as noise, party houses, public drunkenness, other minor violations that police have to come out for, and they generally have no ammunition. If somebody's having a loud party at 3 in the morning, regular problem I had for a while in my neighborhood, police would come out. They're not really going to cite them for a misdemeanor. They tell them to stop. They stop. 2 days later, they're having another party. Well, if you gave them a $250 or $500 ticket, those parties, 99% of the time are just going to stop. So this winds up being a perfect system for everybody. I have some concerns about housing. I have some concerns about animal services. So I'd like us to do the LAPD piece first by itself. And as we prepare to move forward with the next ones, that we meet with stakeholders and make sure they understand the process and make sure we understand their concerns. I honestly believe, as one property owner testified, that this is actually a system that will work better and create better oversight for housing owners, better review and better protection for the accused, and more due process. But if there are things that we're missing, we'll catch them in those stakeholders' meetings and make this work better for the property owners, because that's the intention. I know there are a lot of people that are angry because we have a process that many view as difficult. This is not intended to be one more burden upon people who are already burdened. It's intended to be a lesser burden and a lesser prosecution, but a more likely, quick way to actually get things to be resolved. So I think we do need to meet with stakeholders on housing. We do need to meet with some stakeholders on animal services and sort out the concerns. But just start with LAPD. There's not a lot of controversy. It's a lot simpler. And let's see how the program works. If it doesn't work with LAPD, it's not going to work with the more controversial violations. The program has a lot of due process protections. The current system is inefficient. It's costly. It's somewhat inhumane. If you're caught building a deck without a permit or failing to control noise at a late-night party, you really shouldn't have a criminal prosecution on your record. You should correct the violation. This will allow a citation, will allow people to cure the violation and move on with their life. I think it's a much better system for the violator. It's also a program that's intended to be largely cost neutral. This is not intended to be a big cash cow for the city. In fact, criticisms of this program, this potential program, come in both directions. Some people think it will be so costly that it'll create another bureaucracy that we can't fund. Others think that it's going to bring in so much revenue that we're going to be citing people just to bring in the revenue. Neither one is the case. You can look at other cities that have done this that we're modeling after. It's intended to pay for the cost of enforcement. Nothing more, nothing less, and I expect it to work out that way. So, a few things that were mentioned. Item number 1, I'd like that to be LAPD only to start. I'd like to have us plan housing and animal services and historic protection to be the next ones, but that we have a council report certainly on how the LAPD version is doing, and that we reach the point of confidence that the system is working before we move on to the next ones. And as I said, we make sure we have stakeholder meetings for areas of concern. On number 8, I'm very focused on collections, as is Mr. Parks. We've had many meetings of both audits and government efficiency and budget dealing with collections. There are clearly better ways that we can do collections in the city. At the same time, I wouldn't want to hold up this program, because if we say, okay, it doesn't start till we've nailed down the perfect collection system, we could add an extra 6 months before it starts. So I would ask that we have the meetings that are suggested, that we work out the best system we can when this comes to council, and if we find there are still problems with collections, that we come back later and address those problems. I don't want it to be the thing that holds up a program that could be getting a lot of enforcement done and doing a lot of positive things for the city. I also have concerns about the subpoena power issue as well, particularly in terms of protecting the accused. I think it's intended to give them more due process, and I want to be sure that everyone knows this is intended to be a system that gives more due process rather than less, and I think that subpoena power is needed. As far as fences, this is a very iffy issue, I think, all over the city. In some areas, you may need the fences for gang protection. I think we have more fence issues rather than less in my district, even though it's more affluent. It's often privacy concerns. It's often property concerns, perhaps, more than the possibility of a drive-by shooting. It's much more likely that someone breaks into your home because it doesn't have adequate fencing. So I have an issue I'm dealing with right now where there were complaints in a neighborhood about an overheight fence. When we went to the neighborhood, we found other fences weren't quite as blocky as this one was, but the complainants all had overheight fences. So you could actually wipe out the entire neighborhood's fencing and say, take every single one down. I'm not sure we have a system that works. We get a lot of complaints on both sides, and often it seems enforcement only happens when one neighbor is annoyed with another neighbor. It's not necessarily a fence being worse than a fence somewhere else. It's often just a tool to get back at a neighbor. So I believe Bill Rosendahl is looking at this, and we may at least look at how we deal with the process of fences. but it doesn't really have anything to do with this program. And even if we did include it, right now it's a very expensive process to be cited for your overheight fence and have to deal with it. If it was done through this process, it could be a lot less expensive and less onerous for the property owner that has the overheight fence. So I'm not sure how that'll all play out, but certainly building and safety is not going to be one of the first ones that I believe we recommend as this pilot. And where there are controversial issues, I think we'll work them out before we get them included. So those are a number of my thoughts and recommendations for this motion moving forward.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to allow time for applause, or one fan in the audience. But Mr. Koretz, for all the work you've done on this, there's been a lot of work with you, with the city attorney's office, the CLA's office. The first meeting that I ever had on this very issue was in 2003, and it was under my predecessor. Our first meeting with neighborhood councils, in fact, our very first meeting where we brought all the neighborhood councils together in the 12th district for our first service cabinet meeting in 2003. And at that meeting, it was about a good neighbor initiative that they wanted to launch. And the idea of the Good Neighbor Initiative was to try to figure out a way to decriminalize these very issues, to have some type of administrative fee or function, because it's been widely said that it's the broken window theory that are ruining neighborhoods and bringing crime and blight, that if you don't take care of the issues in communities and neighborhoods quickly, they grow into much bigger problems. And so I applaud you in moving forward on this. I wish I could say that it was going actually further as a pilot program. A lot of the things, in looking at the list, and I do have a couple of minor questions, but on the LAPD list, I know a lot of these things, these are areas that LAPD is actually already enforcing and citing under spirit of the law. And I want to emphasize that, particularly with some of the comments that were said earlier, whether it's going to be building and safety or animal services or whoever that might be in the future to jump on this ordinance as well and get involved in the ACE program. These will all be, I'm assuming, spirit of the law, not letter of the law type of administrative citations. So it'll be there'll be discretion up to the officer who has the authority to cite, taking all the totality of the situation into consideration while they're at the scene. And so all those things will be taken into account. But under LAPD, I know there's a lot of these things that are already enforced, loud noise, certainly gambling, other things in here. There's one thing I did have a question on that is on the list, and I think the city should lead by example before I start getting into some of the other things. But it does say here gas-powered leaf blowers, and that's on the list under LAPD. And if I remember correctly, it was 15, 20 years ago where the city banned gas-powered blowers, and is that's citywide at all times. There's not varied times. So I'd like the city see the city first take the initiative to ban those on our own property. I went to the Van Nuys City Hall to the off-site council meeting a few weeks ago, and there was our city personnel with a gas-powered blower. So I think we should probably make sure our city isn't violating any of these things that we're going to be enforcing. But having said that, I think some of the building and safety initiatives, I know that my colleague who's been behind this motion and pushing this wants to start off with first LAPD and then housing and then animal services and then maybe some of the building and safety code violations. I think we should look at doing those things sooner rather than later. I think some of these, the ideas of some of the concerns that are more complicated, like the height of the fencing and things, those certainly can be taken out for now. There's other things that are in violation that are serious issues in local communities. These are the calls that we get in our office. These aren't things that I just care about. These are the calls I get in our office. I got as a chief of staff for the last 8 years. I'm getting as a councilman now daily. Most of the calls we get are building and safety related, animal services related, and also LAPD-related calls. The complaints about the community not being maintained outside of the city's responsibility, which is paving the streets and trimming the trees and fixing the lights and making sure the sidewalks are repaired, which I think is a city responsibility. Outside of those issues, it's the property owners and tenants and both retail, commercial, and residential maintaining their own properties and taking care of a lot of these violations that just is very difficult for building and safety to enforce. It's very difficult for housing and animal services to enforce. I think it was stated clearly what the city attorney's initiative and objective on this is that it decriminalizes it, that it takes it out of the criminal element and it makes it an administrative process instead. And I think that's important that we share that with folks in the community. Although right now it sounds like we're starting off only with LAPD, I would like building and safety to be strongly considered as part of one of the next departments along with the others as well. But I think you're right in that LAPD is already set up to do a lot of these things. I think some of the other departments should be given a shot. And so that's my 2 cents, but I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just go through a couple of things. One of the things, I certainly agree that we should be doing a pilot. I thought when we discussed this before that the reason that we dealt with LAPD, Animal Services, and I believe Housing was to try to create 3 dissimilar pilots at the same time so that we could see how it works. And in fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Animal Services was the first pilot in one of the proposals because we'd already put in the budget how much money they were going to make for us, and that got put to the side. So I would hope that we maybe, as a committee, could recommend to the city, to the CLA, CAO, and the city attorney that we approve, say, 3 departments, understanding that LAPD certainly can be first, but as they work out the kinks in that, they can immediately move to Animal Services and move to Housing, but they don't have to come back for every department. I think also it would be important, as was stated, that we get from the departments their list of violations, because one of the things I'm concerned about by having just LAPD, they see almost every violation for every department by their response to calls. And what I would not like to see happen is that we find that this goes off the tracks real quick, where people are citing something they're not familiar with because they are not the expert in the area. And so we'd end up with LAPD out citing something that's really in the purview of a planning or things of that nature. So I think also that I'd like to make sure as we go through this that our penalties and our enforcement application is consistent with existing municipal code, that we're not giving people 4 or 5 different procedures that they may have to follow, but that we make this as consistent with what's in play at this time. The other part I'm concerned about is on subpoena powers. I would probably have more of a comfort level after we determine the definition of hearing officer and after we determine who they are and how that's going to perform. And then you look at whether they should have enhanced powers or not, or whether there are procedures in the city that can take care of that without an initial phase providing subpoena powers before we know how far, how much, and what's the impact on a new program. Because one of the things I'm concerned with is the last thing I think we need is to put a program out and have it fail or have it go sideways before we can get any positive response on it. And so I think it is important to move slowly and to add functions as we move forward. I think also what we don't need is a program that requires collections and we don't have the ability to collect, because it just fits into all the other programs that we then get an audit that says they owe us $5 million and we haven't collected it. So we do need some form of a collection program as it initially starts. Otherwise, we just don't want a lot of paper hung out in the community. And as we know, with a lot of violations, if people feel that there's no ultimate response, they will not comply. What saves us in most instances is that I think 85 to 90% of the public complies voluntarily, and we spend 90% of our time looking for the other 10%. So I would hope that we would look at ways in which there is a a viable and a clear collection as part of the initial phase. It may have to be tweaked down the road. It may have to be added to account receivables. It may be something internal that we have to do. But I don't think we could roll this out and people believe there's no sanctions or that they can ride for a while, or it's just another piece of paper that they can throw on the dresser. And so I think those are my concerns, in that the issue on the number of departments, I would hope we'd look at it to give a true test in a variety of locations, so that LAPD certainly is equipped to do this. But on the other hand, I think, as Mitch said earlier, most of our complaints often do not come about LAPD's response. It comes from other departments where people believe that there's an inconsistency or a lack of consistency on how things are approached. And so those are the things I think that hopefully, with all that stuff we've regurgitated on the table, that we'd ask the CLA and CAO to kind of pull it together for October 3rd. But I'd like to also ask the clerk is that on that week that we get a placeholder in council on that Wednesday, so that we can assure that we have a date certain to get these things done. And so, but that's what I would look at in the sense of trying to balance this between a viable program and something that's going to be meaningful, because as we know, because it's brand new, the moment it slips or it doesn't immediately become effective, then all the naysayers will be in here the following week saying, I told you so. And I would prefer we have instant success on a smaller scale and a variety of scales, as opposed to having no success on a big scale.
Yeah, just a couple things. One is we limited it. It was originally going to be a bigger program because we got feedback both from council and from community with concerns. So, and I agree, building and safety violations are probably the most prominent and the reason we started the whole program. So I'd suggest we do the LAPD portion first. We figure out a relatively minimal period to assess how well they're doing, I don't know, 3 months, 6 months, and after that, allow the city attorney's office to add to the several next departments that we've suggested and add building and safety to that. So animal services, building and safety, housing, but first have it come back with an assessment of how it worked with the LAPD, and then from there allow them to add on as they're able.
Let me comment on building safety. For me, that is not in my first 5 until you resolve the planning issues on signage and things like that. I think building and safety is a quagmire until some of these things that are lingering out there get resolved, one of which I would not want anybody out there citing somebody on a sign in our current legal situation and the number of ordinances that we're working on and all the other stuff. So they're not in my top 3, but I would certainly think animal services, and we certainly should be hopefully one day getting a sign ordinance that everybody understands, and so that we can clearly give that direction. But I think the worst thing we do is send somebody out in that building and safety quagmire and have them drown immediately, because they're more complicated than I think we realize.
Robert Lee, Office of Finance. I'll make this quick. I'm here in regards to recommendation number 8. As you were saying, we've been working with CLA and City Attorney for about the last year. They've told us their concerns regarding this project, and we've been trying to learn more about it. We will, of course, work with CLA and City Attorney on making this successful, and whatever we can do to assist, we will. However, the concerns of us is the fact that even though we are being pulled into this to review recommendations for collections, and since Office of Finance does certain things like collections and refunds and whatnot, we understand how we're getting into this. However, we have concerns as regarding the functionality. Our department right now, with its existing LA tax system and format, is not formatted for this program or this process. We will, of course, see what we can do to accommodate or give any recommendations. And, of course, we will be at your meetings as required. However, our primary concern is the fact that since we are based on the focus of our mandate is based on tax collection and revenue generation, we are concerned that the additional workload, whatever the programming requirements, the system changes and modifications that are required, would interrupt or factor into this in a negative way.
We're not asking you to lose money, but I would hope that all your concerns by October 3rd get addressed and resolved, because I think what we need is how we can implement collections. We cannot resolve this in 6 months saying, here are all the things that we think the hurdles. We hope that Office of Finance works with CLA by the 3rd and say, here's the best plan. It might get altered, it might get tweaked, it might have a lot of things between now and as we keep moving, but by the time this ordinance is done, we need a collection plan, other than in a shoebox or something. Okay.
Just one last question on this. So if we're moving forward then with just LAPD, and I'm not sure what this list isn't labeled, and it wasn't attached, but it does have a list of municipal code sections on it. Is it only these particular code sections, or is it all municipal code sections that then LAPD that would be transferred into the administrative site program?
Councilman, we received that list from the city attorney's office as the initial list that came from the departments, but I believe you made the statement that we are looking at the spirit of the law rather than at the letter of the law. So if this committee wants to go with LAPD and their enforcement authority, that is your decision that you made it.
So I guess, well, that's the clarity I'm looking for. Are they in fact all LAMC violations then would trigger into the ACE program? So automatically, even if because there are some that are building and safety related municipal code sections, but they don't say that under the MC, the enforcement authority, would that be then LAPD have the ability to, as an example, it's hard to, it's like saying, if you're not here, stand up. So what's not on here? Garage sales, excessive garage sales, or importing goods onto a property for sale at a garage sale. That's a building and safety code violation traditionally, not LAPD, but it's municipal code ordinance. So how would that?
That was intended as a list of examples.
That's why I'm asking.
It was not intended as an exclusive list, and we would strongly recommend that we not create exclusive lists that say these are the only sections that a department can enforce. We can do that, for example, as was suggested with animal services.
So these will be all municipal code
it would be
violations.
Let me back up and say conceptually what the program is giving an alternative for a department, whether it be LAPD or whomever, an alternative enforcement tool for those violations they already enforce. So it's not intended to change what it is that they do. It's the alternative for enforcement. So they can now prosecute whatever they prosecute. We haven't visited the entire list. Right. They can prosecute enforce whatever they enforce through either a misdemeanor or an infraction. This gives them a third alternative. Whatever it is that they are currently enforcing, they would have a third alternative.
You carry around an administrative site book, and then they can pull from the municipal code.
Correct.
We're not expecting LAPD to enforce building and safety code violations.
No.
That's not what this envision is.
In theory, they could, though, but it's not.
Do that
as
now.
a practice, it's not really going to happen.
Right.
Correct.
We don't expect to see LAPD going out and citing every overheight fence in the city.
And obviously, built into the system is a report back to the council to say what exactly is happening, what are we seeing? And if we were to see LAPD doing a number of things that would be normally outside the scope of what they would enforce, I think at that point, the council would say, LAPD, what are you doing with the citation program?
So this will be a separate, and there is an administrative site book now that's printed. This will be a different type of site book that's generated and then sent to all officers in the kit room to check out. So that's going to take some time and training, and even with LAPD, and they're already out there doing it.
MC have been doing that already.
So So
I know it's late, but I was...
All come back to committee, report back on how the
LEP is in the process of
implementation is going to be done.
Right,
Okay.
design and citation.
I know it's late, but perhaps for 1 minute, we could have the representative from the LAPD speak to how this will impact them, and particularly on things that they don't currently cite, whether they're likely to start going out and citing fences and hedges and such things.
Yes.
I don't know if you could address that. How this will impact you in terms of whether LAPD would change what they're currently citing and start citing overheight fences and bushes that are out of compliance and other things that you don't usually address.
Sir, the way it was addressed to us from the city attorney's office, this was just merely an alternative to what we were already citing. The loud party calls, the vice violations, as far as for permits and stuff like that, but it's not something that we were looking at to expand on our enforcement in regards to code enforcement or anything like that.
Thank you. Council members, John Chavez with Animal Services. I just wanted to point out an important aspect of how Animal Services can be impacted by this if we're not a pilot program. 2 weeks ago in council, council approved the omnibus dog licensing ordinance. In that ordinance, we did make penalties that were consistent with the ACE program. If we are not going to be one of the pilot departments, we will have no way of issuing violations for licensing problems with dog owners. So it's very important for us to be a part of that. We strongly recommend that our department be a part of it. Otherwise, we will not be able to issue any penalties for the dog licensing aspect of our operations.
So you want to go into effect along with the LAPD right now?
That's correct.
They were the first pilot, and then we couldn't get it done, and they became second and third. But they were supposed to be the first pilot.
Well, maybe we could ask for a recommendation from staff to come back on October 3rd as to whether to include both Animal Services and LAPD as the first initial pilot.
Sure, yes.
So I will move that if we need that direction.
Any other questions? We will hold this item in committee until October 3rd. We ask the clerk to get a placeholder for Wednesday of that week for council. We ask the CAO, CLA, and city attorney to work together and to resolve these 14-plus recommendations that have been discussed today, and that we come back with a report and a ordinance for October 3rd.
And may I ask, just for purposes of that, the very first recommendation that the CLA made, which was which departments might be included, and the list of offenses, the approach that I'm thinking of, and I'm taking as a direction from the committee at this point, is that LAPD be included. Whether or not a second or third department is to be included will be decided when discussions between us and the CLA. The list of offenses, as I have described it, which would be informational, would be provided as to each department, but it would not be a limiting list unless for example, with Animal Services, the carve-out was made of a particular area expressly but it wouldn't be by the list that's adopted. It would be by the action taken with respect to the ordinance.
Yeah, I think what I understood on the list is that the departments would provide what they had a comfort level and an understanding of within their current purview.
Right.
And it wouldn't be limited to that, but they would just be informing the council of what sections that they will concentrate on.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. We are adjourned.